darkness was not emptiness. Darkness was judgment. A singularity the size of galaxies pulsed like a dying heart, its surface shifting between stars, black holes, and cosmic dust, as if the universe were trying to give it shape, but could not agree on what it was. A silent orchestra of gravitation and void, gathering two galaxies into its shadow, folding them like pages of a book pressed shut. Every living mind, every machine intelligence, every force-sensitive soul, every quantum network of Starfleet, all felt its presence. It did not speak to their senses. It spoke to their purpose. Ships trembled in their docks. Ancient creatures woke from meditation. Artificial minds paused mid-calculation. The voice rose like a sound deep beneath existence, not heard but imposed, like a truth too old to require language. One reality repeats its stories. Stars near the singularity dimmed. One reality learns to change. Empires froze. Hive minds shivered. Prophets listened with dread. Evolution is obligation. Space tore open with bladed light. Stagnation is extinction. A billion neurons across two galaxies screamed the same fear. This was not a choice. It was a sentence. A decree that existed before gods, before time, before any lightsaber or warp coil was ever conceived. The presence spoke its law. War decides which universe survives. Gravity itself distorted as the rule echoed. The loser is erased, entire, absolute. Planets felt the statement. Suns rattled. Space stations groaned as if they too understood what was at stake. Then came the clause that struck the deepest, cutting both hope and rebellion cleanly. Refusal is surrender. Surrender is deletion. No pacifist could abstain. No empire could negotiate. No creed could escape. If either galaxy tried to preserve itself by refusing battle, if they dared to choose peace, they would be annihilated together. No legends, no future tales, no Force ghosts, no Q, no reincarnation, only erasure without memory. The presence concluded not with cruelty, but inevitability. Fight or vanish. Only the evolving shall remain. The two galaxies were thrown together, systems overlapping like mismatched veins grafted into the same cosmic body. Hyperspace tore through subspace. Warp corridors wove through hyperlanes. Dimensions crashed, and physics bent until both universes shared the same battlefield of existence. The first warriors to answer the decree were not alive. They were hunger-wearing metal, near Yavin, where a rebellion once scraped a miracle from desperation. The sky distorted like liquid mercury. A shape emerged, monolithic, emotionless, a geometry carved from sentient logic. A Borg cube, matte black, pulsing with toxic green light. It did not announce its arrival. It did not broadcast diplomacy. It drifted as if space itself belonged to it, as though existence were merely another resource waiting to be assimilated. Inside, the cube, the collective stirred as one mind, species unknown, weapons of mass system erasure detected, technology, planetary class, desirable, inevitable, assimilate. Then their sensors beheld not one, but two moons of death. The first, a perfect sphere of metal with a planet-killing heart. Death Star 1, completed, armed, a monument to terror. The second, a raw skeletal titan still under construction, but more powerful than its predecessor. Death Star 2, exposed reactor ribs glowing like molten sunbones. The Imperials aboard them did not know they were answering a cosmic decree. They only knew something defied their symbol of fear. The cube drifted closer. On Death Star 1, alarms pulsed. Officers shouted technical reports. A general leaned over a screen, pale and disgusted. "What sort of vessel is that?" a sensor crewman whispered. "It's not broadcasting any transponder. No life forms. No emissions we recognize." "No life forms? Then what powers it?" A TIE officer answered, shaken. "Purpose." An order rang over the Death Star's comms. "Prepare the super laser." Reactor cores thrummed like the pulse of an approaching storm. Kyber crystals aligned, focusing a hatred that could turn planets into dust. The Borg cube observed. Green veins crawled across its hull, scanning, learning, absorbing spectral data. No diplomacy was offered. No fear registered. The Empire saw only a target. The Borg saw only potential. The superlaser charged. Imperial voices barked code sequences. Gunners steadied shaking hands. Massive focusing arrays spun into alignment. A stormtrooper watching through a blast-proof window whispered, "It's just a block. Why doesn't it move?" Because the Borg did not flee from weapons. The Borg studied them. The Death Star fired. Green annihilation cut through the void. Cosmic flame compressed into a beam thick enough to pierce a world. The Borg cube lit up like a dying star. Half its hull vaporized instantly, fracturing into incandescent liquid metal. Aboard the Death Stars, crews screamed victory. The Borg did not scream. They adapted. The wreckage reformed itself, like metal learning how to become muscle. Nanoprobes flooded damaged plating. Algorithms rewrote armor composition mid-explosion. The cube stabilized, half scar, half rebirth. Imperials stared, paralyzed. It had survived an impossible blow, not defiant, educated. The superlaser charged again, automatic protocols initiating a second strike. But this time, the cube adjusted, panels reconfigured, absorbing heat signatures, realigning electromagnetic lattice structures. Its surface rippled like thoughtful liquid, preparing something entirely new. The Death Star fired again. This time, the beam fractured through Borg-generated interference, still powerful, but now informative. The cube learned the pattern, the Kyber pulse timing, the energetic harmonics. The Imperials realized too late. They were teaching the cube how to kill worlds. The Borg rotated, a hunter now mirroring its prey. 8 panels unfolded, forming a new aperture, not copied, but interpreted, optimized through machine instinct. A green beam fired, thin, focused, surgical. It struck a vulnerable Kyber exposure on Death Star 2. The skeletal moon screamed with blue-white fire. Explosions ripped through unshielded sections. Raw energy tore through scaffolds. Stormtroopers were sucked into void. Reactor sparks lit the dark like shattered stars. The Borg voices spread across the cube. "We will improve upon your destruction. Your fear is inefficient. Assimilation is superior." The cube advanced, not with rage, with purpose. Imperials panicked. The Death Stars rotated weapons into position. The Borg began deploying assimilation nanoclouds into space, microscopic horrors drifting toward the stations like silent snow. The Empire did not see the snowstorm of doom. They only saw one cube, and they believed one cube was enough to crush. The Borg believed 2 moons were enough to learn from. The presence and the singularity whispered across both galaxies. Only one path survives. Only one galaxy evolves. The Death Stars would not fall easily, but they would learn nothing. The Borg cube closed the distance, not as a vessel, but as a decision, creeping toward the twin Death Stars through a field of debris that was still cooling from the last exchange. Small fragments of its hull, flung loose by superlaser impact, drifted like dying embers and then dissolved into nanomaterial motes, recoiling back toward the cube in shimmering microfilaments. The debris returned to its origin, becoming armor again, as if the cube itself rejected the idea of being broken. Inside the Death Stars, alarms screamed through steel hallways. Officers rushed, technicians sprinted, doors slammed open and shut as security teams spilled into gun batteries. The Empire had never treated a single vessel as a threat of this magnitude. Worlds, yes. Armadas, yes. One ship, never. The cube pushed closer through a silent storm of assimilation spores, barely visible particles glinting when caught in reflected light from the moon-sized stations. They drifted toward the metal giants almost peacefully, as though the Borg were offering a quiet handshake before the inevitable violence. On Death Star 2, engineers working on exposed scaffolding saw the haze passing them and assumed it was residual coolant venting from damaged arrays. They didn't understand until they saw metal around them turn a sickly shade of green, corroding into jagged wire tendrils. A maintenance worker reached to steady himself against a railing and screamed when the rail pulsed like a vein, tendrils latching around his glove, fusing it to his armor. He jerked away, ripping the glove off entirely, hand bleeding through torn skin. The Empire was trained for order, not imagination. They had never seen metal behave like hunger. Death Star Y, command officers shouted for containment protocols, but they didn't realize this was not contamination. It was invitation. The nanomaterial storm settled into seams, data ports, oxygen vents, weapon housings. It studied the infrastructure the way the cube had studied the super laser. The Borg did not rush assimilation. They cataloged it. They did not devour technology. They became fluent in it. The Death Star crews did not yet grasp that the Borg were treating the stations the way one would treat a massive ancient artifact worth deciphering. They were learning how to wear them. The super laser of Death Star. I powered up again, eager to finish the job. But the cube's reaction changed. It no longer drifted passively. It moved with accelerated vectors, rotating its armor panels to different harmonics in anticipation of the beam. Inside the cube, data surged through nodes like lightning across black water. The collective adjusted shielding frequency to resonate with Kyber-generated radiation, intercepting the destructive spectrum. The Empire charged the weapon fully. The cube surged forward, no longer waiting to be struck, forcing the Death Star to track its unpredictable entry vector. The super laser fired a third time. The beam hit, burned, destabilized the cube's outer plates, but it did not tear them apart. The cube absorbed more energy and turned heat into adaptation. Some plating burst open like blisters, but nanites swarmed over them and hardened in an unfamiliar, crystalline pattern, an imitation of Kyber resonance, stolen and weaponized within seconds. The Borg would not just survive the Death Star's weapon, they would one day replicate it. Aboard the Death Stars, realization became fear. The officers shouted quicker, their tone fractured with panic for the first time in their careers. Concentrate all turbo lasers on the vessel. Batteries lined the station's surface, rotated like rows of emerging teeth. Thousands of cannons unleashed a storm that turned the void into a shrapnel-lit inferno. Turbo laser blasts struck the cube in streaking volleys, hammering armor at every angle. The cube shuddered, cracked, buckled under the barrage. Panels tore loose. Nanite conduits exploded outward. Borg drones in exposed areas were vaporized. their bodies melting into green mist that crawled back to the hull like spilled life returning to a container. The cube was not invincible. Turbo lasers ripped holes into its geometry, blasting jagged cavities, dismantling entire sections that left its interior visible. Dark corridors, pulsing conduits, scattered drones convulsing from disruption. The Empire's weapons inflicted harm the Borg could not fully prevent, but every wound became architecture, every loss became knowledge. The cube accelerated again, closing to a proximity no one dared to imagine. The Death Star was built to obliterate worlds from afar, not to fight at intimate distance against a vessel that wanted to touch it. The cube reached the shadow of the Death Star, close enough that its surface lights reflected off the planet killer's hull. Gravitic clamps extended from the cube like spiked limbs, stabbing into the superweapon's plating. The Borg latched onto the Death Star like a parasite clamping onto a colossal beast. The Empire's shock turned to rage. Tractor beams, get it off the surface. Projectors engaged, attempting to pull the cube free. But the Borg inverted the tractor frequency, feeding energy back into the mechanism until the Death Star's circuitry overloaded. A section of hull near the emitters sparked violently and exploded inward. The cube dug deeper into the station's armor, exerting electromagnetic waves into its hull. It wasn't trying to damage the metal, it was trying to read it, to rewrite it. The first boarding breach came not from a shuttle or a docking corridor, but from the hull itself. Nanofibers drilled inward like roots into soil. They pierced armor layers, snaked through ventilation shafts, entered maintenance corridors. They became filaments, cables, wires of assimilation. Where they touched metal, they changed it. Where they touched technology, they bonded with it. Stormtroopers mobilized inside, sealing bulkheads, forming firing squads. The nanofibers tore through sealed doors and hardened into lattice-shaped apertures. Borg drones began stepping through freshly formed openings, as though the Death Star itself had built doors for them. Blaster fire erupted down the halls. Red bolts slammed into drones, dropping some, but those behind them walked over the fallen. Troopers switched to higher power shots, scoring deeper burns into Borg plating, but drones hardened with each volley, adjusting personal shielding frequency in real time. The first wave was expendable. The second wave learned. The Death Star lost corridors not because of death, but because of understanding. Drones marched, firing assimilation tubules into stormtrooper armor. The nanites did not need to pierce skin immediately. The armor would carry the infection deeper. Troopers screamed, pulling at their chest plates as metal liquefied against their bodies and fused with their muscles. Those who destroyed their suits to survive were met with drones that adapted to aim for exposed flesh. The Empire had superior numbers. The Borg had superior inevitability. On Death Star 2, catastrophe worsened. Nanomaterials seeped through incomplete structure, bypassing shields that were still under construction. Drones materialized in half-built corridors, walking across skeletal beams. Troopers fought them in zero-gravity scaffolds, firing between glowing power conduits. A drone toppled from a beam but extended mechanical limbs, grabbing onto live power cable and using the surge to recharge. The Empire's unfinished masterpiece was becoming the Borg's easiest entry point. Executives on both stations communicated urgently, commanders debating how to kill an enemy they didn't understand. One proposed venting entire decks into space. Another argued for detonating interior charges. A third demanded contacting Vader or the Emperor. The idea was rejected instantly. This was not a war to report. This was a test, and the Empire would not risk appearing weak before its own gods. They didn't know the entire universe was watching, waiting to erase them for hesitation. Borg voices echoed through their neural grid, processing the superweapons architecture, rewriting targeting systems, learning structural weaknesses. They would eventually realize the Kyber chambers were vulnerable to internal resonance disruption. They would discover that the station could be turned into a seed of assimilation, capable of wiping entire populations in seconds. The Death Stars were not merely targets. They were the Borg's future bodies. The Empire did not realize that they were feeding the enemy not with data, but with identity. The cube released another set of clamps, gripping deeper into armor like claws. Hundreds of drones now walked the moon-sized halls, their footsteps synchronizing into a single drumming echo that traveled through the station's walls. The Death Stars were not losing territory. They were being consumed. The Empire's only advantage remained the weapon they did not know how to use at close range. The cube had forced intimacy. Now the Empire would need to find a way to destroy a parasite attached to its core. Aboard the Death Star 1, the weapons coordinator shouted the most reckless command in the history of Imperial warfare. "Angle the super laser downward. Fire on the hull." Officers looked at him in horror. "Sir, the blast will penetrate our own structure. Better destroyed than assimilated." That was the choice. Obliteration or infection, fear or adaptation. The Borg had forced the Empire to consider destroying itself rather than being changed. And that was the moment the universe noticed. One side was learning. One side refused. The cosmic decree waited silently as the Death Star prepared to fire on its own body. Whether the Empire dared to evolve or die in stubborn pride would determine the next blow of fate. The superlaser began to charge, not to kill the cube, to kill itself. And the collective listened with eerie approval. A station willing to destroy itself to avoid evolution was proof of stagnation. The Borg did not fear that choice. It was exactly what they wanted to witness. They only needed to survive long enough to take advantage of it. The Death Star's core reached critical ignition. The beam began its internal firing cycle, and the collective prepared to adapt to the idea of suicide as a weapon. The battle was no longer physical. It had become ideological, evolution versus refusal. The next blast would decide much more than casualties. It would decide who deserved to exist. The Death Star's superlaser pulsed like a dying sun, trying to ignite inside its own skull. Deep under layers of metal and ego, the Kyber chambers hummed with violent resonance, vibrating through every deck, every conduit, every oxygen pipe. The machine spirit of the station, if there ever was one, howled in frequencies only sensors could hear. Alarms flared red across tactical panels. Technicians screamed warnings and begged their officers to reconsider, but the order was sealed. They would fire downward into their own hull to kill the Borg burr latched onto their body. The weapon charged. Green light flooded the firing chamber, searing through the containment barriers. The Death Star wasn't built to fire inward. Its focus arrays weren't calibrated for self-aimed destruction. Energy bled sideways into structural mounts, igniting support beams. The super laser became a grenade trapped inside a cannon barrel. Borg drones felt the vibrations through metal under their feet. They heard the machine preparing suicide. The collective assessed the threat instantly. Calculations rippled through every drone neural node faster than a spoken shout. If the Death Star detonated, the blast would eradicate the Borg on board and destroy most of the cube still attached to its hull. The Borg would not stop it. They would co-evolve with the explosion instead. The superweapon triggered. The beam released downward. A blast of emerald energy carved through the station's exterior plating. The explosion didn't behave like the Empire expected. It didn't destroy the Borg cube. The Borg cube was latched into the hull. The beam went inside. The super laser scorched the surface, then plunged into the station's interior like a spear made of annihilation. The impact vaporized several Borg boarding nodes, hundreds of drones, entire corridors, plasma pipes, and shield generators in a chain of eruptions. Everything in the path turned to white-green fire. Drone screams were silent. They did not feel pain as individuals, only failure of efficiency. The station convulsed as its own gun ripped its bones apart. Metal peeled away, melting like candle wax. Debris erupted outward, hurling burning fragments of hull into orbit, trailing smoke that dissipated into vacuum. Several Borg assimilation routes were severed instantly, curling like dying vines and flaking into metallic snow. Troopers and officers alike were turned to ash where they stood. Those farther from the blast were hurled down corridors, armor cracked, screaming into flash-boiled helmets. The cube tore partially free from its anchor, shearing units of armor as the explosion forced its hull to detach. The cube twisted away, flaming from the impact, ejecting molten material that cooled instantly into brittle green shards. But even as the cube reeled, its wounded plating did not collapse. It shifted, reoriented, hardened with new rough surfaces. It learned how to brace against world-ending energy. It became more jagged, more resilient. The Death Star stunned itself. The Borg began to adapt. The internal explosion ripped deeper into the station, shattering central support beams. Engineers scrambled to divert overloads, but feedback surged through the main reactor like a chain reaction commanded by madness. One firing cycle had carved a mortal wound inside a moon of steel. The Empire forced a lesson upon itself. A weapon that destroys worlds will destroy itself if misdirected. Borg nanites swarmed toward damaged plates, analyzing the blast residue. They found what they needed: trace signatures of destabilized Kyber sublimation. They would not try to steal the super laser intact. They would learn how to collapse worlds from inside. Stormtroopers regrouped in survivor pockets, choking on heat, shooting drones that still emerged from twisted corridors. The drones that survived inside the blast reached appendages into unstable material, feeding off it, converting volatile matter into strengthening alloys. They weaponized the burn that tried to kill them. Some drones coated their torsos in black-laced green plating that glowed with internal fire. They were learning to walk through the next explosion. Death Star 2 saw the blast ripple across space. Its commanders panicked, believing the first station was dead. They scrambled to redirect turbo laser fire, launching a volley into the cube now drifting away from Death Star Wu's impact crater. The cube absorbed the hits differently now. Shields altered to dissipate thermal damage, and surfaces rippled with layered shock absorption, learning from the weapons that struck it. The cube shut down the Death Star's chance to kill it twice with the same mistake. Another volley hit, and sparks erupted, but fewer plates were lost. The cube's armor cracked, reforming slower this time, but reforming with purpose. It did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be inevitable. The Death Star. I brute-forced what it could not understand. The Borg cube embraced mistakes as evolution. The two philosophies could never coexist. The cube rotated and released a volley of disruptor beams that cut along the base of Death Star Worm's turbo laser towers. The beams were not powerful enough to slice fully through structures of that size, but they opened weak points. Internal kyber-stressed plating shattered from prior energy transfer and now began collapsing. Turbo laser turrets fell from their mounts like decapitated limbs, tumbling into space, some still firing randomly as they spun. A severed turret shot a beam into its own hull, carving another wound. Terror spread among the gunners. They had never seen their own guns fight against them. The Empire had built everything to obey. The Borg had built everything to learn. The universe itself was realizing which of these was more dangerous. Death Star 2 commanders turned their focus inward. They broadcast orders to divert max power to armor plating, but their shields weren't complete. They had nothing to hide behind except metal bones. The cube drifted toward the second moon, now leaking smoke. Its hull was wounded like a forging blade still in the oven. The Borg Collective did not retreat from damage. They used it as instruction. The edges of the cube pulsed in irregular shapes. It began growing odd geometric expansions, small directed energy nodes, angled armor ridges, and hollowed channels along edges that resonated with subharmonic frequency. It was becoming something built specifically for the Death Stars. The Empire watched, horrified, and fired everything. Turbo lasers streaked into the cube, peppering it with impacts that scarred and cracked its evolving shell, but each hit taught the cube more. The cube advanced through the barrage at slightly altered formation, rotating just enough to reduce direct force per surface angle. No Imperial had ever seen a ship change its physics strategy mid-flight. Star destroyers fired salvos from surrounding positions, lending their support. Their beams tore sharper gouges into the cube's underbelly, melting drones unlucky enough to be near exposed chambers, but the cube again hardened. The nanites were now prioritizing energy dissipation over simple armor repair, building invisible shield matrices deep inside the hull. The cube wasn't trying to survive Star destroyers. It was preparing for something larger. Death Star 2 realized that too late. The cube did not aim at guns anymore. It aimed at joints. It targeted the superstructure scaffolds, the massive skeletal ribs still exposed to vacuum. The beams hit critical support trusses, melted the connective metals, and spread through the station's pressure braces. Entire sections of the incomplete Death Star sagged inward like collapsing organs. Construction equipment and scaffolding drifted off into space. Workers screamed as beams fell away from their anchor points, plunging them into void. The Empire was being peeled open. One of the station's larger scaffolding towers fell inward, smashing into half-built reactor conduits. Energy overflow erupted from the impact. Lights across the unfinished interior flickered to blackout. Vulnerable power channels blew open, sparking storms across exposed corridors. The cube fired again, lodging another beam into the exact same point. Then again, it was tearing a death vein wider. The reactor containment section cracked. Engineers screamed over comms. "We're losing containment on secondary reactor 8. A chain reaction would begin if they didn't isolate that sector immediately. Commanders shouted back to seal blast doors, but the blast doors weren't fully installed. They slammed shut halfway and jammed due to misaligned tracks. The Borg had found the incomplete station sin depot, arrogance in being half-finished, yet fully feared. Nanoclouds surged toward the compromised area, swarming over breakers, converters, and conduit clusters. They didn't overload the reactor directly. They kept it from being shut down. The Borg didn't destroy the Death Star. They prevented the Empire from saving it. Across both stations, confusion intensified. The cube was enacting a logic foreign to Imperial warfare. The Empire fought to control. The Borg fought to force evolution. And in that moment, the Empire faced the one fate it was built to deny: change. The collective issued a silent command across all drones, all nanites, all systems. Once the reactor breached, the station would serve as raw material. The Death Star was not dying. It was being converted. The Empire could no longer treat the Borg as a threat. They were infrastructure. The superweapons reactor began to overload, light pulsing through veins of metal. Death Star 2 would soon explode, not as a corpse, but as a chrysalis. If the Empire did nothing, they would feed the enemy its most powerful form. They had one choice, the same as Death Star 1. Destroy themselves to avoid assimilation. The Empire began evacuation procedures. The Borg understood immediately. The Empire would rather erase their own creation than allow it to evolve. Drones prepared to block evacuation routes. Nanites flooded hangar bay systems, jamming door sequences. Assimilated metal grew jagged around entry ramps. The Borg would not let their future body escape them. The Empire had seconds to decide if dying as themselves mattered more than living as something new. The Death Star was no longer a weapon of destruction. The Borg were offering it rebirth. The Empire would rather see it burn. The final phase was about to begin, and the universe waited to see which force understood survival. The Empire fought to preserve identity. The Borg fought to improve it. Only one would be allowed to exist. The Death Star 2 shuddered like a dying colossus, struggling to hold the world inside its veins. Its reactor groaned under overload shock, pressure building like a star forced into a cage. Engineers screamed across failing comm channels, their voices drowning beneath cascading alarms. Plasma pipes burst along the inner spine, spraying arcs of molten light that turned metal walkways to debris. Workers fled through half-completed corridors, dodging falling debris as unfinished blast doors slammed shut behind them. The evacuation wasn't order. It was panic. The Borg cube crept closer through scattered turbolaser fire, its hull raw with glowing heat fractures and jagged wounds still leaking molten alloy. The damage did not slow it. It made it stronger. Broken plates fused into thicker, sharper armor. What looked like ruin became reinforcement. The cube's armor pulsed with basilisk-like ridges, learning how to convert stress into structure. Every hit from Star Destroyers only refined it further. It did not evolve around the Empire. It evolved using the Empire. The collective had recognized a design flaw. The Death Stars were too large to protect themselves, yet too powerful to be allowed to escape destruction. They were weapons with no right to survive their own failure. Borg nanites swarmed through compromised plating, turning raw material into living alloy. The cube was not stripping the station for resources. It was seeding it. Death Star 2's skeleton would not be scrapped. It would be reborn as Borg matter. The Empire realized too late that they had not been fighting an invader. They had been feeding a metamorphosis. Admiral Jareth screamed into comms. If the Borg take the reactor, they'll turn the entire station into something else. Cut off access, shouted a lieutenant. We need to sever its connection from the core. But Borg nanites had already burrowed through emergency shutoff relays, jamming them in a mesh of living threads. The Death Star could no longer shut itself down. Once again, the Empire was trapped by the very weapon meant to give it control. Across the surface, more nanite storms crawled from the cube's wounded hull, spreading like infected frost over armor plates. They didn't need to conquer the whole station. They only needed to reach the reactor. Stormtroopers formed firing lines at hangar bays, unloading full rifle salvos into crawling metal organisms. Flame troopers coated the walls in liquid fire. The Borg matter did not die. It crystallized. The flames hardened it into obsidian-like plating that became unbreakable. The Empire's countermeasures fixed the Borg's vulnerabilities. Droids rushed forward with welding torches to cut hardened nanite nodes off the walls. Before they could reach them, the plating ruptured into needle-formed drones that leapt onto the droids' chassis, rewiring them mid-function. Droids turned and marched against their own crews. The Borg had found a new template for assimilation. Not flesh, not ships, but the fusion of machines and programming. The droids would become architects of the new weapon. Vader's shuttle tore through the chaos, engines burning fire trails through vacuum. Trooper escorts followed him toward the station, trying to guard the hangar. They didn't realize there was no hangar anymore, only assimilation chambers. Vader leapt into the docking zone as drones swarmed the floor. He carved a path through jagged Borg constructs, slashing chunks away from hardened plating, pitching forms off, half-built ledges and into the reactor shaft below. Each strike seemed to matter less than the last. The cube's new armor and drone hybrids adapted around his strikes. Fresh drones learned to flank him, waiting for opportunities, not to kill, but to attach. Vader sensed the aim of every lunge. He wasn't an enemy to defeat. He was a resource to acquire. He kicked a drone off his boot, sliced two more through the chest, then crushed a mass of fused nanites with a wave of the Force. He could not allow contact. A single cut, a single scrape, a single needle would mean assimilation. Vader realized he fought not to win, but to avoid becoming a trophy. "Seal the bay," he commanded. Troopers obeyed, locking lockdown pylons and venting atmosphere to purge drones. The evacuation thrusters fired, pulling drones into vacuum. Not all were ejected. The strongest latticed themselves into the hangar walls, resisting the pull. Vader crushed them with the Force, then turned away. Victory was impossible here. Delay was all he could offer. A voice whispered across every mind, not in words, but in sensation, inevitability. The Borg didn't announce conquest. They made conquest feel normal. Death Star 2's core pressure reached catastrophic threshold. The crew initiated self-destruct protocols. The command issued. Nothing happened. Borg nanites had disabled the final sequence. The Empire had one option left: destroy the station manually. That meant blowing the reactor without authorization. That meant total sacrifice. Vader reached communications. Turn the cannons inward once more. Fire on the core. Silence. Officers stared at him over the channel. One whispered, "That will kill everyone here." Vader answered with cold steel, "Better death than absorption." The order was obeyed. Every functional surface cannon rotated inward. They fired. Beams slammed into the reactor casing. The explosion began. It did not burst outward. The Borg had reinforced too much. The core cracked inward instead, collapsing into itself. The explosion swallowed drones, troopers, plating, scaffolding, and half the cube's tendrils. Space bent around the Nova-like collapse. The Borg cube was ripped in half by the implosion. The first Death Star's remnants were pulverized. Drones disintegrated, tearing apart mid-form. Hundreds of thousands died. The stars flashed bright around the shockwave. Silence returned. Then a whisper of green light drifted through debris dust. Fragments of the cube began to pull toward one another. Nanites still clung to radioactive dust and molten slag, binding the remnants of drones into new shapes. From the wreckage, like a carcass rebuilding itself from bones, the cube began reassembling. It rotated slowly, regrowing supports, sealing fractures, forging new shapes with the molten heart of the weapon. The explosion had taught it more than assimilation ever could. The cube emerged reforged, asymmetrical, jagged, glowing like a scarred star, with a rind of cold iron. The Borg had not been defeated. They had molted. They drifted forward, wounded but ascending. Death Star 2's wreckage spun as a broken cage, cracked open and hollow, its power scattered like ash. The Empire had failed to destroy evolution. The Borg had evolved through destruction. The cube turned away, leaving the station to rot, not out of mercy, but because nothing else on it was worth adapting from. The Death Stars were dead. The Borg cube lived. The first battle had chosen which universe would shape the other's destruction. The cosmic entity drifted through the void once more. Its whisper crossed the stars. Adaptation prevails. One universe changes. One universe clings to itself. The Borg claimed victory. Star Trek led. Score stood in the dark. Trek ascends. Star Wars bleeds. The first victory rippled like a wound through the cosmos. Where the Borg limped away reforged, the Death Stars remained gutted, a hollow monument to stubborn power. The cosmic entity expanded through the void again, its body forming from collapsing nebula strands, galaxies crushed into joints and star cores burning inside its ribcage. Its voice did not echo. It commanded existence to listen. One universe adapts. One universe stagnates. Continue. Two signals pulsed from opposite edges of the multiverse. One carried war songs. One carried creed. One promised glory. One promised survival through tradition. The entity's arms stretched, grasping worlds like pebbles. It tore at the boundary between realities. From the Star Wars side, fighters launched not because they were commanded, but because they refused to sit still. Mandalorians ignited their jetpacks across a moon of cold, ridged rock orbiting Mandalore. Beskar armor shimmered beneath sunless clouds, helmets painted with clan sigils, blades heated in portable forges. Red dust swirled at their boots as the armorer hammered steel on an anvil carved from the moonscape itself. Sparks lit her visor. She spoke softly to the gathered warriors. "We do not avenge. We prove." Across the stars, the Klingon Empire answered with its own fury. Warbirds decloaked like hunting beasts, dropping warriors onto the lunar basin in fiery landing pods. The air rang with harsh warrior chants, drums made from metal plating, voices rising like volcanoes. Martok himself landed among them, armor scratched, one eye blazing with anticipation. Klingons unsheathed blades shaped like crescents and claws, reflecting red moonlight on honed edges. The two armies faced each other, not behind shields, not with cannons, not with snipers perched on high ground. They walked toward the center of the battlefield, surrounded by dunes of ancient basalt and fractured meteoric glass. The wind carried grit that scratched armor and stung eyes. Nobody blinked. There was no negotiation. There was no request for terms. They simply stood close enough to kill. Mandalorians raised vibroblades glowing faintly. Klingons drew, batleths, mek'leths, serrated dirks forged from the heart metal of dying stars. Both sides felt the decree without needing to hear it again. Honor versus creed. Glory versus way. Klingons versus Mandalorians. The central ridge where they stood creaked under their combined weight. The rock cracking like it understood violence was about to reshape it. Martok raised his blade high, its edge glinting with battle scars and blood-worn polish. We fight because the unworthy exist, and someone must carry the burden of killing them. The armorer lifted her hammer, its metal face glowing from forge residue, smoke trailing from its heat. We fight because the worthy deserve to stand. Wind howled between them. Sand hissed against metal. The moon seemed to hold its breath. Jets ignited. Hulking figures charged. Blades flashed. The entire ridge erupted into clash. The Mandalorians struck first, launching into the air as a swarm of armored hornets. Vibro spears rumbled with high-speed oscillation. Wrist rockets streaked like silver darts. Their jetpacks allowed attacks from above, cutting angles impossible for grounded warriors. They dive-bombed like comets, striking and bouncing off stone, sparks bursting under their boots. But Klingons welcomed the aerial assault. They braced themselves, not with shields, but with hunger for impact. One leaped into a falling Mandalorian, slamming a blade into the warrior's mid-flight trajectory and tearing armor plating free. Others threw grappling hooks upward, dragging enemies down into melee range. A batleth caught a spear shaft mid-descent and snapped it in half with a roar. Many Mandalorians hit the ground hard, but they landed ready. Beskar didn't shatter. It sang with impact, absorbing pain, reinforcing strikes. On the ground, their short-range skills came alive. Vibrating blades struck batleths in rapid bursts, sparks spraying like fireworks. Gauntlets caught blades. Tethers looped around arms and necks. Wrist flamethrowers roared through beards and burned braids from Klingon warriors who laughed through the fire and kept fighting. Every second was a storm of metal on metal. The ground drank sweat, blood, fuel, and molten iron fragments. Helmet visors cracked. Klingon armor split along seams. No one retreated. No one stepped back. They simply fought until wounds became advantages. Martok broke through 3 warriors at once, cleaving a Beskar pauldron and forcing the Mandalorian beneath it to his knees. Before the killing blow landed, an explosive charge triggered on the pauldron, throwing Martok backward in a spray of burning dirt. A Mandalorian tactic, armor that fights even while failing. The armorer faced a knot of 5 Klingons alone. Batleths closed around her. She didn't pull a blade. She used only her glowing hammer. Every strike left dents in armor, shattered kneecaps, broke ribs, smashed jaw plates. She hammered a chest plate until it split like a ripe fruit, parried with her tongs, turning them into a clamp that crushed fingers on a sword grip. She moved like a forge come alive. Klingons around her howled in admiration, not rage. A warrior who crafts her own death blows. Yes! Mandalorians responded by firing rockets skyward and detonating them mid-air, showering the battlefield with micro-shrapnel and disorienting bursts of concussive thunder. Klingons countered by slamming blades against the ground in coordinated rhythm, using shockwaves and dust to break Mandalorian footing. It was not brute force versus finesse. It was two cultures of battle expressing philosophy with steel. Mandalorians struck fast because skill demands efficiency. Klingons struck brutally because victory demands suffering. Neither side was winning. Neither side was retreating. Honor and creed were bleeding evenly into the moon. But the Mandalorians noticed something. Jetpacks gave angles. Armor provided endurance. Precision turned fury aside, and one advantage could break the balance. Din Djarin stepped into the fray, but not as a lone champion. He coordinated signals across their visors, tactical data flows blinking inside helmets. Mandalorians shifted formation, jets boosted in synchronized arcs. They moved as units, not individuals. Beskar clanked against Beskar. They fought as if their armor were one body, their weapons one will. Klingons fought as individuals, greatest alone. Mandalorians fought as a creed, strongest together, the armorer signaled. Now! Dozens of Mandalorians lunged in perfect triangles, overwhelming isolated Klingon fighters. They forced them into pockets and neutralized their greatest strength, their pride to fight as one against many. Klingons were being cornered not by stronger warriors, but by strategy born from unity. Martok gripped his blade tighter and bellowed with blood-soaked laughter. "Good! Make us earn our deaths!" The battlefield tightened. Mandalorians advanced. Klingons refused to fall back. The moon crackled under the pressure of their conflict, red dust lifting in sheets. Jetpacks roared, batleths swung like meteors, helmets collided, the ridge shook. No one, not even the cosmos above them, could yet tell which side would break first. The second fight had begun, and its end promised something neither culture desired, a defeat earned by honor. Sparks showered across the ravaged battlefield as the ridge split deeper beneath grinding boots and scraping steel. Every footstep carved new scars into the rock. Jetpack exhaust scorched the dust into black glass. The clang of metal vibrated through the moon's thin air like drum thunder rolling across open sky. This was not a war defined by tactics on screens or commands given from bridges. This was belief manifested through pain. The Mandalorians advanced as a single, iron-minded organism. The Klingons endured as unstoppable individual juggernauts. Neither side hesitated. Neither side cared how many died. They only cared how they died. A trio of Mandalorians swept forward in tight formation, blades angled to trap a single Klingon warrior between them. He snarled, swinging his batleth wide, but they slipped beneath it, using the momentum against him. Jetpacks flared to pivot at impossible angles. Their blades struck joints, not panels. They didn't need to kill him in a single blow. They needed to break his stance. The Klingon did not retreat. He braced and took every hit, blood spraying as he rotated his batleth, catching one Mandalorian by the ribs and slamming him against a stone outcrop. The impact dented Beskar, but the armor held. The Mandalorian stabbed upward, driving a vibro knife through the Klingon's thigh. Both warriors collapsed together, snarling into each other's visors. Neither stopped. Neither gave up. They continued until both bled into the dust, unmoving but still gripping their weapons. Elsewhere, a Mandalorian attempted a flying strike, only to have a Klingon rip his jetpack mid-flight with a hook blade designed specifically to tear metal plating. The Mandalorian crashed headfirst into the dirt, helmet cracking. The Klingon kicked him over and roared, "Stand again! Show me!" The Mandalorian staggered up, wiped dust from his visor, raised his blade once more, and simply answered, "This is the way." They charged at each other again, neither aiming for an easy kill, only for a worthy one. Bo-Katan carved a path through the chaos, spinning with dual vibro blades, sparks trailing like comet tails behind her. She moved with fierce precision, cutting through a Klingon soldier's gauntlet, then kicking another in the jaw so hard that blood sprayed through his teeth. She struck fast, clean, never wasting motion or emotion. A Klingon blocked her next attempt and shouted, "Fight with fury, coward!" She twisted her blade beneath his guard. "I only fight with purpose." As he fell, another Klingon roared behind her and grabbed her from behind by the throat. Before he could crush her neck, a night owl sniper dropped from above, slamming a knee into his helmet and knocking him to the ground. Bo-Katan finished him with a single thrust. Mandalorians were winning through cohesion, every warrior completing another's technique. Martok saw the flow shifting like a storm front and did not resist it. He adapted, roaring orders to his soldiers. "Pairs, break the formation, fight with each other, not for yourselves." Klingons looked at one another. They were not accustomed to shared strikes beyond symbolic rituals. But this was no time for ego. They answered their general with cracking grins, slamming shoulder to shoulder in paired units. Now Klingon warriors fought not as lone hurricanes, but as twin tidal waves. Dual batleths crossed to trap a Mandalorian spear. One Klingon disarmed the warrior, the other headbutted him so hard his visor shattered. Mandalorian gauntlets responded with flamethrowers and whistling birds. Klingons responded by slamming blades into the flamethrowers and igniting themselves on purpose, roaring and burning glory as they tackled enemies off cliffs to die together. Blood hit the ground like heavy raindrops. Armor cracked and dented. Beskar was chipped, Klingon plating bent. Even the moon seemed scarred by the battle. The very air turned metallic from the clash of alloys. Din Djarin cut through the fray with a Beskar spear in hand. He fought like he was swimming through the tide of war. Stabs were short, jabs swift, defensive blocks tight. Mandalorians watched his stance and began imitating it mid-battle, adjusting their own timing. Klingons watched him too, but they imitated differently. They adopted his measure, but added ferocity, meeting precision with aggression, time to split focus. Several Klingons rushed Din at once, not because they needed to overpower him, but because they wanted to test themselves against the best of his creed. Din struck one down with a thrust to the stomach, blocked another's mek'leth with his bracer, and countered with a sweep of the spear that slashed through two warriors' knees. But one Klingon managed to grab the shaft of the spear and yank it with the same strength Din used to stab him. Din was pulled forward into a punch that dented his helmet's cheek plate. The Klingon screamed, laughing, "Yes, Mandalorian, show me your fire!" Din responded not with fury, but with a quiet headbutt that snapped the Klingon's nose and knocked him out cold. He never spoke the words, but every Mandalorian near him understood the message. Fighting well did not require noise. The armorer's hammer glowed nearly white-hot now from constant impacts. She struck at a Klingon who was taller, heavier, stronger. He charged through her blows, absorbing the pain like fuel. She caught his bat'leth between her hammer and tongs, twisting it free and driving the tongs into his wrist. Bones snapped. The warrior screamed with triumphant agony and used his other hand to uppercut her with a gauntleted fist. She flew backward, skidding across the dirt, but pushed herself up, blood dripping from beneath her helmet. The Klingon struggled to rise too, laughing with blood seeping from his mouth. "You forge warriors as if they are blades," she answered, voice calm and steady. "A blade is only sharp when it is beaten." She struck him again, the hammer caving in his chest armor. He fell, not defeated, but honored. This fight was no longer a clash of factions. It was a conversation, spoken in violence. Mandalorians answered with unity. Klingons answered with individuality. Both sides learned. Both sides adapted. Both sides improved. They became more lethal through fighting each other. That was the tragedy, because only one culture could survive this tournament. The moon began trembling underfoot as seismic pressure from impacts finally reached breaking point. Cracks ran across the ridge in jagged lines, magma glowing faintly beneath. Two warriors fighting too close to an opening fell into the chasm. One Mandalorian, one Klingon. Neither screamed. They embraced as they dropped, stabbing into each other even as they vanished beneath molten fire. Martok roared with pride. The armorer bowed her head in respect. Both sides slowed their assault, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. Breathing heavily, they separated just enough to stand and face one another, along the fault lines splitting the ridge. Dozens dead on each side, hundreds wounded. No one regretted a single cut. Martok banged his blade against his armor. "Mandalorians, you have shown honor worthy of song." The armorer lifted her hammer. "And you have proven that death can be earned, not suffered." The pause lasted only long enough for blood to drip into the crack beneath them. Then they charged again. The last stage of the fight would not be group tactics or coordinated strikes. It would end the only way such cultures could accept, through champions. The moon quaked, the armies roared. Din Djarin stepped forward. Martok raised his bat'leth. The final battle of honor had begun. The moon's ridge split wide, fire simmering beneath the cracked stone like the heartbeat of a buried forge. Every warrior on both sides stepped back, not in retreat, but to witness the last test of their cultures. The wind tasted of blood and iron. The sky dimmed beneath drifting clouds of ash and dust kicked up by the battle. All engines dimmed, all blasters lowered, all blades paused. Even fire hovered without purpose between the factions, its crackle drowned by the stillness of expectation. This was no longer a battlefield for armies. It was a platform for two nations to wager their existence. Din Djarin tightened his grip on the Beskar spear. The weapon vibrated faintly, still hot from the friction of combat. A single streak of blood dried across its edge, dark red against silver. His breaths were controlled, his shoulders square. He stepped into the moon's cooling wind like a storm building without sound. Opposite him, Martok planted his boots into the cracked stone, the fault line widening beneath him. His armor hung damaged across his frame, dents forming like metals. One eye burned brighter than fire. His bat'leth dripped red along its inner curve, sharp as pride itself. He lifted it in both hands, not in threat, but in ceremony. Around them, Mandalorians leaned on their blades, chest plates cracked, helmets scorched. Klingons pressed fists against bleeding wounds, snarling with excitement, shaking with anticipation. Both sides watched, not to cheer, but to witness truth. No chant, no roar, just the quiet that comes before passion meets destiny. Martok grinned, blood lining his teeth. You fight with armor, with unity, with calculated flame. But show me, Mandalorian, do you fight for yourself? Din said nothing. His silence answered everything. A Mandalorian fights with creed, but creed is not chains. It is chosen. It is worn like armor no forge can melt. Din raised the spear in a motion that spoke not of rage, but purpose. Martok read that purpose, and his grin widened. They moved. The clash struck like lightning meeting steel. Din thrust with spear precision, each strike aimed to disable. 5 jabs in the span of a breath. Knees, ribs, throat, wrist, heart. Martok parried 3, redirected 1 with a twist of his wrist, and crushed the last blow into his armor with the Batleth's backside, denting the Beskar plate with brute force. The Mandalorian retreated a step, recalculated, and circled wide. Martok advanced. His swings came like waves, wide, heavy, unstoppable. Every movement risked his own opening, but Klingon combat did not fear exposure. It invited it. He swung overhead, splitting ground in a quake that sent sparks along the fault line. Din rolled beneath the arc, slicing upward from Martok's elbow joint. The Batleth caught the spear mid-thrust, and the 2 weapons locked, vibrating with the force of 2 cultures colliding. Martok bellowed. Din drove forward silently. The weapons screeched, metal grinding metal, neither giving way. Sparks burned between them. Martok's strength began forcing Din back, not through power alone, but through sheer expectation that the Mandalorian must meet him head-on. Din suddenly dropped to one knee, and Martok's force sent the Batleth swinging off balance, only for Din to pull him forward by the weapon and smash his helmet against Martok's skull. The impact resounded like a cracked bell. Martok stumbled. Din struck again, spear slicing along his side, drawing fresh blood. The Klingon caught the spear shaft with his palm, letting it tear into flesh, and pulled himself close enough to slam his forehead into Din's visor. Beskar cracked across the faceplate. Both staggered back. Both breathed heavy. Both smiled beneath their pain, one behind metal, one behind blood. Martok wiped his wound with a bare hand and smeared it across his chest, marking himself in crimson. You bleed me well. Good, then I bleed in honor. Din adjusted his stance, spear held low, body angled like a stalking wolf. If you fall standing. Martok laughed, raising his blade. There is no other way to fall. They charged again. Martok's swings becoming faster despite blood loss, each strike churning air into heat. Din's movements tightened, becoming smaller, sharper, conserving motion, reading opportunity. Sparks trailed every collision. The spear tip flickered between blocks like lightning. The Batleth curved like the moon around each counter. Martok feinted a high strike, pivoted low, and swept the Batleth sideways into Din's legs. Din jumped, but not fast enough. The blow clipped his calves and launched him off balance. He landed hard on one knee. Martok roared triumphantly and lunged for his throat. Din fired his grappling line. The cable wrapped around Martok's wrist, yanking the Batleth off trajectory. With a harsh twist, Din pulled the weapon free. It clattered across the stone. Klingons gasped, not with outrage, but with thrilled approval. Mandalorians nodded. Tactics honored the kill. Martok did not mourn the loss. He charged barehanded. Din thrust forward with the spear, but Martok twisted past it, grabbed the shaft, and ripped the Mandalorian forward with staggering force. Din slammed into Martok's shoulder armor, nearly knocked breathless. Martok headbutted him again, denting the helmet deeper. Din retaliated with a vibroblade from his gauntlet, slashing Martok's ribs. Both locked together, one unarmed, one barely armed, driven only by will. Martok's fists hammered Beskar. Din's blade carved deeper wounds. Martok's broken teeth let loose a growl that shook the ground. Din's breathing grew ragged beneath cracked filters. Each hit felt final. Then Martok made the fatal move, not because he erred, but because he chose honor over victory. He pulled himself tighter into Din's stabbing blade, impaling deeper so he could land one last punch into the Mandalorian's helmet, the strike strong enough to drop him to both knees. Din would not break. His knees were not surrender, they were leverage. He drove the spear upward, straight through Martok's chest. The blade pierced armor, flesh, bone. Martok exhaled a sound that was half agony, half triumph. He placed one hand over the spear, holding it inside his body so Din could not pull it back. Martok leaned close, their helmets nearly touching, blood dripping onto Beskar. "You gave me an ending worth memory. Mandalorian." Din did not reply. He only braced Martok's fall, lowering him to the ground like a warrior, not a casualty. Martok died smiling. The fault line closed with a crack of cooling magma beneath them. The blood of both cultures seeped into the ridge. Mandalorians stepped forward. Klingons knelt, not in surrender, but in tribute. The armorer spoke, voice like a glowing forge. "Honor has chosen." The Klingons answered in a single, unified roar. "Kapla to the Mandalorians." The moon howled with wind before silence returned. The Mandalorians had won, not through dominance, through earned respect. Score shifted. Star Trek 1. Star Wars 1. Balance restored. The cosmos demanded a third answer. The moon's dust had barely settled. The last echoes of Klingon laughter still lingered in the thin wind like a warm ember refusing to die. Mandalorians secured their wounded, gathering fallen armor with reverence. Klingons sang as they burned their dead, their voices rising like fire until even the stars felt honored. The cosmic entity watched without expression, its colossal silhouette dimming to a patient shadow. It did not speak with triumph or sorrow. It only measured. One universe adapts through choice. One fights through tradition. Balance must break again. A ripple tore across the void, reshaping starfields into a corridor of war. The battlefield shifted from red stone to a silent, starlit expanse orbiting the orange glow of a familiar world. Vulcan, a planet defined by logic, a people defined by restraint. But the battle here would not belong to them. It would be a fight fought over Vulcan, not by it. The First Fleet decloaked. Sleek warbirds emerged one by one, green hulls curving like predatory blades. Winged silhouettes glided into formation without thrusters bursting or reactors flaring. They moved like thoughts, invisible until intention demanded visibility. The Romulan Star Empire had arrived. Their commanders stood silent at tactical stations, eyes narrow, voices flat. Romulan officers did not bark orders. They issued precise corrections. Their weapons did not hum with power. They whispered with anticipation. Warbirds charged their disruptors only once, waiting not for targets, but for perfect targets. Across the void, the Second Fleet erupted into existence. Not elegant, not silent, not strategic. Hundreds of CIS warships emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of locusts bursting from a rift. Lucrehulk carriers floated like giant metallic eggs, escorted by munificent frigates, recusant destroyers, and dense clouds of tri-droid fighters and buzz swarms. They came not to intimidate. They came because they did not care about intimidation at all. The CIS fleet activated instantly. There was no pride, no ceremony, no hesitation. Droid generals opened comms, their monotonous voices clashing with Romulan stillness. Enemy targets acquired, established superior numerical advantage. Calculating outcome, win probability, 92.33%. The Romulan commander sat unmoved, fingers steepled. His voice was cold as empty space. Overconfidence without arrogance. Machines without ego. How unusual. His tactical officer whispered, "Shall we engage, Commander?" He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Let them think us cautious. Let them think us predictable." A droid voice cut through the channel, filling every warbird with sterile arrogance. "You have been surrounded. Surrender will expedite your disassembly." Not an insult, a statement. The Romulan bridge filled with something that barely resembled laughter. More of a quiet smirk shared between terrified geniuses pretending they weren't afraid. The commander lifted a hand. "Decloak only the forward wings, only those we want them to see." The fleet shimmered. Cloaks fell like peeling light. Warbirds became visible, but only a fraction of them. The rest remained lost in shadow. The droids instantly recalculated. "New targets acquired. Updating strategic model." The Romulan commander smirked. "Good. Update again." The warbirds fired. Not a barrage, not a volley. A single synchronized strike. Each ship firing one precise disruptor beam, aimed not at hull plating, but at the joints of capital ships. Lucrehulk spasmed, flickering with partial system failure, as the beams sliced through power relays and communication nodes. The CIS didn't panic. They couldn't panic. They adapted. Damage received, compensating, redirecting control to auxiliary droid nodes. Thousands of buzz droids launched from the crippled ships, like angry insects filling the void. They tore toward the Romulan fleet with singular purpose. The Romulan commander hissed the next order. "Phase disruptor countermeasures. Target chemical processors." Warbirds fired second shots, not at ships, but at the fuel lines inside buzz droids. Microscopic explosions rippled across the swarm. Millions of tiny machines ignited, dissolving into clouds of molten dust. The CIS simply computed new options. Buzz droids lost. Launch tri-droid siege formations. Huge tri-fighter droids deployed, rotating their spinning arms of plasma fire and locking on. Warbirds evaded with surgical precision, drifting through weapon arcs rather than outrunning them. This wasn't a battle. It was two philosophies dissecting each other. Computation versus deception. Predictive logic versus selective visibility. The Romulan commander's eyes narrowed. "They're learning us too quickly. If we let them analyze us longer, we will lose our advantage." "Then what do?" he whispered. "We lie." Warbirds turned their cloaks on and off erratically. Some flickered rapidly, others vanished completely. A few stayed visible. The CIS scanners blinked chaotic data back to Command AI. "Error, inconsistent signatures, cannot determine ship quantity." The droids reacted by saturating the entire sector with fire. Plasma bolts and missiles detonated blindly, lighting space in chaotic supernova bursts. The Romulans let them. The commander whispered, "They will burn their own fuel supply to target possibility." It worked. The CIS wasted ammunition on decoys. Warbirds let the droids empty their guns. Hyperspace mines disguised as dust particles drifted into their path and detonated, ripping a munificent frigate apart. The tide shifted. The CIS numbers still dwarfed Romulan firepower, but numbers meant nothing without resource discipline. Droids fought eternally. Ships did not. A single line lit up across the commander's console. Fuel reserves for CIS fleet depleted to 37%. His eyes darkened with satisfaction. "It is time. Initiate phase sabotage." The Romulans cloaked again, not to hide, to strike with invisible precision. The Romulans were not fighting droids. They were starving them. Buzz droids were dead. Tri-droids running dry. Capital ships unable to sustain swarm output. Warbirds circled, unseen, unintimidated, unpanicked. The battlefield turned. Star Trek won. Star Wars won. Now Romulans were about to break the tie. The battlefield dimmed as Vulcan's orange sun dipped behind its planetary curve. Space became a shadowed crucible, lit only by engine flares, disruptor beams, and the cold luminescence of dying ships. The Romulan warbirds vanished fully now, shimmering into invisibility as though they had re-entered logic itself. Their enemy could still track heat signatures, plasma residue, and gravitational wake, but the Romulans had prepared for that. They began ejecting controlled heat pockets, glittering clouds of polarized gas decoys, fragments designed to mimic mass, and micro-thrusters programmed to emit false acceleration trails. The CIS droids scanned them and instantly misidentified the decoys as living warbirds. "Targets detected. Fire!" A hail of plasma and missiles detonated into empty space. The Romulan commander watched from his control chair, calm and predatory. He whispered, "Waste yourselves." The CIS fleet did not experience frustration, only correction. Their voices remained monotone as hundreds recalculated. Ammunition expenditure at 48%. Redirecting swarm strategy. Priority shift. Resource conservation. For the first time, droids ceased fire. The void grew quiet. The Romulan commander nodded. "Good. If they will not consume themselves, then we shall pull the hunger from them." Warbirds materialized in tight firing lines across 3 vectors, above, below, and behind the CIS armada. Not a full decloak, just enough for weapons to hit with perfect accuracy. Disruptor beams cleaved into long-range missile bays, melting primary launchers into slag. The droids adapted instantly, projecting calculations across thousands of networking nodes. "Lose launch capability. Switch to energy weapons." The Romulan tactical officer stiffened. "They are adjusting faster than anticipated." The commander remained composed. "Then we accelerate their downfall faster than they can compensate." He raised a hand. "Cloaks off. Maintain firing." His ships obeyed. Full visibility. Full attack. Beams carved through automated gun batteries. Plasma hull plates rippled and burnt. Missiles detonated inside, their tubes. The Romulans fought with perfect lines, surgical precision, and disciplined timing. Then the CIS unleashed a countermeasure so brutally simple it was elegant. They didn't aim at the ships. They fired at the entire region, everywhere the warbirds could be. A droid admiral broadcast across its fleet. Mathematical compensation, saturation grid, fire on all possible locations. Blue energy lightning streamed across space in intersecting geometric waves, not targeting the warbirds, but targeting the probability of warbirds. It was as though the fleet attempted to erase uncertainty itself. Fields of plasma slammed outward like expanding webs. The void detonated in sheets. The Romulan fleet reeled as several warbirds were caught mid-maneuver. Cloaks flickered, systems jolted. 3 ships were torn open, hulls cracking apart into glowing debris. Shields failing. They are not aiming. They are solving us. The Romulan commander gritted his teeth for the first time. So they can adapt, after all. Good. Shall we pull back? No, pulling back invites pursuit. We must change the nature of the problem. He opened a secure channel. Initiate Talmora Protocol. Officers froze. The Talmora Protocol was not a combat strategy. It was a cultural sin. A method the Romulan military kept hidden because it mocked everything Vulcan logic ever taught. The officer's voice quivered. Commander, the Talmora, it risks complete chaos across the system. If machines demand logic, then let us give them madness, the order issued. Across the cloaked fleets, warp cores pulsed irregularly. Artificial spatial distortions rippled like broken mirrors across space. Micro-anomalies formed, black flickers twisting gravity. Sensors scrambled, maps corrupted. The CIS attempted recalculation. Error, input invalid. Spatial metapatterns irregular, recalibrating. They recalibrated. Romulans changed the distortion again. Error, machine learning failure, system compensation impossible. They recalibrated again. Romulans changed it again. Even droid logic had limits. They could adapt, but only to patterns. The Romulans were not producing patterns. They were inventing randomness. The tactical officer whispered with awe, "We are driving them insane." The commander replied, "No, we are forcing them to confront imagination." The CIS armada began firing blindly again, not from aggression, but from confusion. Computing answers so quickly that they overloaded weapon cycle timers. Cannons spat beams into nothingness. Warbirds disappeared once more, using the chaos to surgically slice into hyperwave communication relays. Without unified command, the droid fleet divided. Each ship began calculating its own solution. Every droid brain acted alone. They no longer worked as a collective swarm. They became individuals, something they were never built for. They desynchronized, tripping over each other's vectors, misinterpreting commands, colliding firing lanes, entering contradictory formations. The droids had achieved something they were never designed to possess: identity. And identity destroyed them. The Romulan commander saw ships flying into each other, firing into friendly units, misrouting power into compromised coils, melting their own reactors through logic loops. He whispered quietly, like a priest saying absolution. "We gave them freedom. It killed them." Warbirds decloaked fully now, radiant in emerald flame, blades sharpened by triumph. Their final barrage didn't feel like a battle. It felt like a thesis. Disruptors shredded the remaining CIS warships. Lucre hulks ruptured into spirals of detonating limbs. Tri-droids crashed into their own carriers. The final droid voice broadcast through a static-choked channel. Conclusion: chaos cannot be computed. And then silence. The last ship cracked apart like an equation breaking under paradox. Across the battlefield, Vulcan's sun rose again. Light washed the ruins. Romulans stood victorious, not through power, not through numbers, but through deception that even logic could not predict. The cosmic entity stirred. In silence, the score changed. Star Trek 2. Star Wars 1. The balance had broken again, Vulcan's light faded as the cosmic battlefield shifted once more, not into the symmetry of logic, nor the pride of warriors, nor the cold mechanics of strategy. No, the next war did not belong to soldiers or fleets. It belonged to profit, corruption, crime. The void bent inward like a closing fist, collapsing stars into smoky haze. The scene reshaped into a churning swamp of neon corruption, smoggy skies, and molten filth. Towers of steel and slime rose out of murky pools, dripping with pollution. Fires crackled in pits that burned waste, not fuel. Ships littered the landing yards like dead insects. The air tasted like oil and blood. Nal Hutta. Hut Palace lights flared in gaudy, arrogant color. Greens, purples, golds, reflecting off the rot below. Slaves dragged chains through tar. Gamorreans grunted at them. Nikto mercenaries sharpened poisoned vibroblades while spice dealers exchanged crates under guarded eyes. Speeder gangs revved engines in mud-slick ravines, their headlights cutting through rain thick as sludge. 1,000 criminal syndicates hummed in disharmony, all paying tribute to worms of power lounging on mountain thrones of wealth. At the highest balcony, several huts reclined beneath banners dripping in grease, jewels, and ego. Jabba was dead long before this war, but his legacy thrived. The fattest among them rumbled laughter, deep and wet, as holoscreens displayed a new arrival entering their orbit. On the perimeter of Nal Hutta's space, ships emerged. Dark, angular, predatory spacecraft with signatures that didn't scream, but glared. Obsidian plating, gold trim like ceremonial armor. There were no heroes aboard. These were not explorers. They were Cardassians. The Union arrived with grace sharpened to cruelty. Gul Dukat stood at the front of his command bridge, hands folded behind him, chin raised with refined disdain. His voice bled confidence. The Hutts thrive on extortion. We thrive on obedience. Here, we shall teach them both. Beside him, Cardassian officers worked methodically. They were not at ease. They were electrified. They smelled opportunity. They saw not a criminal empire. They saw a state without laws begging for occupation. Their ships aligned into precise grids, broadcasting a message not of war, but authority. Citizens of Nal Hutta, Dukat announced, voice smooth as poison. The Cardassian Union offers a new order. You will surrender your operations, your territory, and your resources to us. We offer protection. In exchange, you offer loyalty. Fail to comply. His voice softened to velvet scar. And we will deliver discipline instead. Inside the palace, Hutts burst into guttural laughter. One slapped his arm into a pool of wine, sending droplets across dancers and droids. Another choked on spice smoke as his massive body convulsed in mirth. The largest of them leaned forward, slime dripping from his jowls. Hoo hoo hoo, we are not people to be conquered. We are crime. We are famine. We are hunger. He gestured, and a single command echoed across the planet. Crush them. Nal Hutta ignited, not like an army, not like an empire, like a hive of filth waking in fury. Black smoke exploded from underground bunkers as pirate craft launched in swarms. Dirty, asymmetrical ships, crudely armored and stuffed with contraband ammunition. Smugglers flocked into the sky, engines coughing toxic fumes. Modified freighters, spice runners, slaver transports, assassination skiffs, all armed with stolen weapons and murder. Cardassian officers sneered. These aren't fleets, they're debris. Dukat smiled wider. Debris can kill if thrown correctly. Let us not underestimate trash. Let us discipline it. Hutt warlords screamed commands. Syndicate bosses distributed illegal ordnance. Rancors bellowed in cages. Mandalorian scraps were sold to mercenaries. The planet itself seemed to vomit fire up toward orbit. The Hutts did not fight with strategy. They fought with numbers, brutality, unpredictability. Their ships rammed without hesitation. They detonated spice holds into toxic gas clouds. They fired weapons built from scrap, powered by unstable cores. They threw bodies and bombs at targets until one stuck. A lesser military would drown in such unregulated violence. Cardassians? They thrived in it. Their computers tracked patterns in chaos. Their shields adapted to irregular radiation bursts. Their disruptors targeted not ships, but command transponders. They knew how to break systems of disorder, cut communication, isolate leaders, create fear. Cardassian fighters struck like scalpels, slicing through pirate swarms and severing their ability to coordinate. Gul Dukat ordered precision strikes on smuggling relay stations, encrypted beacons, warehouse vaults. Every bombing run was a message. Hutt warlords howled. The Cardassians were not here for pride. They were here to colonize crime itself. In the palace, the head Hutt slammed his tail into the floor and screamed a desperate command. "Bring the beasts!" Massive cages rolled into the courtyard. The ground shook. Slabs of flesh and rage rattled chains as rancors emerged, augmented with implants, armored with plating, drugged into manic fury. They were loaded into carriers as living weapons. Dukat watched the loading sequences with amusement. "They are sending animals," his tactical officer frowned. "Should we prepare for ground resistance?" Dukat shook his head slowly, eyes gleaming with predatory delight. "No, we will starve the worms first. The next stage would not be fought with warships. It would not be fought in orbit. To conquer a planet of criminals, the Cardassians would land and choke its economy until it begged to serve, and the Hutts would drown before they bowed." The Cardassians did not descend like liberators, nor like raiders. They landed like bureaucrats of conquest, gliding into Hutt territory with military transports that looked more like war-era prisons than troop carriers. The vessels pierced Nalhuta's smog canopy, engines screaming as sludge-thick rain hammered their hulls. They touched down in organized rows, perfect formation amid chaos. The swamp welcomed them with chemical steam and the smell of boiling sewage. Hutt mercenaries were already waiting. Blaster cannons mounted on reinforced skiffs opened fire. Gamorreans roared with heavy axes, charging over toxic ground. Nikto sharpshooters fired from rusted towers. Acid geysers erupted where explosive bolts struck unstable ground. Even the mud felt weaponized. Cardassian soldiers marched through it without pause. No fear, no rush, no wasted motion. Discipline itself walked into filth. Their armor, polished gray with ridged plating, took volleys like insults. Their rifles hummed dispassionately, vaporizing mercenaries with focused disruptor beams. The weapons didn't blast. They erased, leaving scorched holes where bodies had been. Troops advanced in lockstep, moving behind portable shield generators that pulsed pale blue as they rolled forward like walls. To the mercenaries, this wasn't war. It was order-crushing chaos. Blaster fire grew frantic. Grenades flew. Spice-fueled shock troopers charged with suicide vests. A Hutt lieutenant, reeking of stimulants and greasy wealth, screamed into his comm transmitter. "Kill them! Break them! We hold no law here!" Cardassians responded by erecting mobile pylons. black towers that drilled into mud and activated in seconds. They projected electromagnetic grids across the battlefield, scrambling Hutt weapons mid-fire. Bolts curved backward, launchers detonated in their owners' arms, reinforcement calls jammed into static. The Cardassian officer corps moved among the infantry, eyes sharp as knives. They carried no flags. They didn't need pride, only control. Gul Dukat exited his transport last, letting victory reach him as if it were a servant. His boots splashed through the oily mire. Mercenaries trembled at the sight, not from fear of violence, but fear of someone who calculated it. A Nikto assassin tried to lunge from the shadows, vibroblade coated in poison. Dukat didn't flinch. A Cardassian soldier intercepted, snapping the assassin's wrist, then breaking the spine. The mercenary fell into muck with a wet crack. Dukat didn't look at him. Instead, he lifted a communicator and spoke with calm, aristocratic authority. Begin ration protocol. Across Nal Hutta, Cardassian signal towers activated. A forced network pulsed through slums, docks, spice dens, markets. Hutt-controlled trade routes were shut down instantly. Docking clamps seized starships. Automated tolls emptied credit accounts. Storage vaults were locked from the outside. The Union didn't seize goods. It seized transactions. Suddenly, entire cartels couldn't purchase weapons, refuel speeder gangs, or even buy food for their slaves. Spice shipments stalled mid-transfer. Smuggler ships were unable to take off. Hutt syndicates began cannibalizing each other for resources. The planet's black market, too vast for law, too corrupt for economy, was now choking under Cardassian oversight. And Gul Dukat simply watched. In the palace, Hutt lords panicked. Slime rippled as they shouted orders. Power shifted to desperation. One enormous Hutt slapped his tail against the floor with a sickening tremor. "If they starve us, we starve them," he signaled his war beasts. Deep under the palace, the cages rattled again. Rancors roared, eyes bloodshot, implants glowing. They would not be sent by air. They would not be marched. The Hutts sent them through tunnels. Toxic sludge burst from sewer grates as monstrous, drug-driven rancors erupted from below the Cardassian lines. One dug upward with armored claws, splitting ground like rotten wood. Another leaped from a canal of bubbling waste, jaws snapping around a Cardassian soldier, crushing armor like crab shell. Amphibious rancors dragged troops underwater into tar pits. The swamp surged with teeth and violence. Cardassians staggered back as the beasts began to tear through formations. A rancor slammed into a shield generator, crushing it. Another smashed soldiers into shields, turning bodies into broken armor inside shimmering force bubbles. Dukat watched the onslaught without, blinking. A Cardassian aide shouted over the screams. "Gul Dukat, orders?" He lifted his gaze to the sky. "Open the atmosphere," the aide froze. "Sir, that will expose our troops." Dukat smiled like a serpent wearing silk. "That's the point." He keyed a single authorization code. The Cardassian ships in orbit shifted position, activating heat exhaust vents and radiation dispersal systems, normally used in combat against cloaked vessels. But here they weren't targeting stealth. They were targeting environment. The sky parted. Nal Hutta's polluted air was pulled upward into vacuum-assisted funnels. Toxic gases, swamp fumes, chemical fog, dragged into the upper atmosphere. A windstorm roared through the battlefield, ripping stench from the land. Dragons of filth were being exhaled into space. And beneath it, the rancors struggled. Their lungs were built for sludge, not clarity. Their bodies were engineered to survive poison, not clean air. They gasped, staggered, suffocating on oxygen as if it were acid. The mercenaries coughed blood. Spice addicts collapsed in spasms. Even Hutt enforcers gagged on the changing atmosphere. Cardassians began to breathe easier. Dukat stepped forward as the beasts fell to their knees, roaring silently into purifying air. "You see," he murmured, "crime thrives on pollution. Remove its rot, and it withers." The cost was immense. Several Cardassians lay dead or battered. Yet the Union had turned the planet's corruption into the Hutt's weakness. Mercenaries fled into sewers. Smugglers retreated to bunkers. The palace doors slammed shut with thunderous fear. Gul Dukat wiped swamp tar from his glove with distilled disdain. "Now," he said, "we knock on their door." The Hutt palace doors, thick as fortress walls and sealed with redundant blast plating, loomed above the swamp like a grotesque monument to greed. Even weakened by their own atmosphere, the Hutts still believed in the impenetrability of their fortress. They had ruled through ancestry, bribery, and bodies buried under slime. No army had ever broken into the throne halls of Nalhuta by force. Cardassians did not intend to break in. They intended to prove the doors irrelevant. Gul Dukat calmly surveyed the palace gates as his troops established a perimeter among smoking ruin and fallen mercenaries. Cardassian engineers deployed tri-lobed machines, each unfolding like steel flowers, releasing coils that drilled into the planet itself. They weren't breaching devices nor explosives. They were blockade routes. Each route anchored a growing network underground, locking Nalhuta's central power relays, data spires, and atmospheric controls to Cardassian override. The palace was not being stormed. It was being detached from its world. Inside, Hutt lords panicked. Monitors crackled with static. Syndicate lieutenants barked at technicians, demanding status reports that came back more terrifying with every minute. Communications severed, trade accounts frozen, defenses unresponsive, climate control overridden. Finally, the largest Hutt slammed his bulk against the floor, rattling the entire chamber. "The palace is sufficient. We will fight from within." The advisors shuddered. Without trade, without supply, without bribery, how long could crime reign? Hutts didn't fear guns. They feared irrelevance. The palace lights flickered. Systems shut down one by one, executed by Cardassian command. Every service that maintained criminal empire life flickered into blackness. In the shadows of their own wealth, the Hutts felt something they had not known in generations: vulnerability. Outside, Cardassian troops advanced steadily, rifles raised but not firing. They did not waste ammunition on fear. They allowed dread to accumulate naturally. Discipline itself had become a siege weapon. Gul Dukat stepped onto a mound of swamp metal and addressed the palace, speaking not to fight them, but to limit them. "Hutt cartels," he began, voice dripping contemptuous respect. "You have feasted on ignorance. You have ruled through gluttony. You have enslaved millions because your empire lacks structure. You mistake chaos for power. We do not." His voice resonated across the marsh, carried by amplifiers planted like banners. "You will surrender operations, territory, and authority to Cardassia. In return, we will allow you to breathe. Choose wisely." In the palace, the Hutts roared in rage, but the sound trembled like a wounded beast. They were not warriors. They were merchants of vice. Without markets, they were worms without slime. Yet Hutt still had a final tactic: desperation. One leaned toward a panel, slamming a stubby arm down. Emergency shutters opened in the lower palace. A cavernous bay revealed ranks of heavy war machines, rusted but brutal. These were not fighters. They were enforcers, massive tracked tanks designed to flatten slums, suppress uprisings, crush lesser syndicates under treads. They fired not with lasers, but with industrial weaponry stolen from mining guilds, molten slag launchers, acid sprayers, pressure cannons that turned bodies to paste. These weren't built for combat. They were built for dominance. The palace floor split open as the behemoths powered up. Engines belched black flame. The first tank rolled into the swamp, crushing debris beneath monolithic weight. It didn't aim at the Cardassians. It aimed at the roots. It fired molten slag, splashing superheated metal across Cardassian blockade devices. Circuits burst. Towers collapsed. 2 more crawled from the palace, spraying acid that ate through Cardassian armor plating. A third rammed directly into a generator, causing a chain reaction of explosions that tore Cardassian positions apart. For the first time, Cardassian lines broke. Soldiers scrambled for cover as tanks bulldozed forward. Dukat's second-in-command yelled above the thunder, "They're destroying our infrastructure. We'll lose the blockade." Cardassians fell back under crushing fire. Troops were driven into the muck as acid storms melted barricades to sludge. Discipline was being run over by brute tyranny. Dukat did not panic. He studied the tanks as they advanced, watching the palace ramp disgorge more metal titans into battle. They were slow, unstoppable, gluttonous, just like their masters. They formed a wall of moving brutish will. A Cardassian officer shouted, "Gul Dukat, if we don't stop them now, they'll break the siege." Dukat's expression darkened, not with fear, but realization. "They will not break our siege," he said. "They will break their world." He gave a single command. "Sink Nal Huta." His officers froze. "Sir, but our troops," Dukat snapped back with quiet venom. "So long as Cardassians stand on solid ground, we win. Bring the swamp down on them." Engineers activated sequence codes. The roots that had been clamping systems began burrowing deeper. Instead of stabilizing infrastructure, they reversed polarity and drilled into aquifers and sewage veins. The swamp began to heave. Toxic pools buckled. Caverns collapsed. The battlefield churned like a body convulsing. Swamp water, methane channels, and centuries of buried waste surged upward. Hutt tanks kept advancing, unaware that the ground beneath was turning liquid. One slammed forward, then sank halfway into the mud. Another fired acid wildly as it tilted. A third tried reversing, but its tread spun uselessly in slime. The Hutt war machines, built heavy and dominating, were too obese to survive their own terrain. Cardassian troops pulled back to reinforced ground, while Hutt tanks flailed like drowning beasts. Slag weapons sputtered in the rising muck. Acid sprayers hissed into nothing. Pressure cannons clogged with sludge. The palace itself groaned as foundation pillars softened under shifting earth. Crime's fortress was melting into its own filth. Cardassians stabilized around their goal. The swamp rose behind him like a tidal beast eating its children. The tanks sank deeper, metal squealing, engines screaming, vanishing beneath chemical froth. Gul Dukat raised his voice, letting his words hover over the dying kingdom. "You built an empire on sludge. You die in sludge." Inside the palace, Hutts bellowed as their monitors displayed sinking war machines. The floor trembled beneath them. For the first time in centuries, the Hutts understood mortality. The palace would not hold the swamp would devour its masters, and Cardassia had no need to breach a door that would soon drown. The palace shuddered like a dying creature. Stonework groaned, slime-soaked supports cracked, and the walls that once held decadent power began to sink under their own corrupt foundation. Hut elites screamed orders at their retainers, demanding escape routes, evacuation transports, bribes sent across blocked accounts. Their bodies trembled as the floor beneath them sank by inches, then by feet. Ducat's strategy had not only crushed their defenses, it had crushed their belief in permanence. They had always ruled by numbers, credits, extortion, the illusion of invulnerability. Now all their wealth meant nothing. Gold and jewels fell from collapsing shelves and sank into the rising muck. Criminal treasures, priceless stolen relics, illicit technology, decades of smuggled contraband, all swallowed by the same swamp that had fed their dynasty. Outside, the Hut tanks thrashed helplessly. Their massive chassis, designed to intimidate and subjugate, were now liabilities, anchors dragging them downward. Engines roared and whined until the swamp flooded their intake vents, silencing them one by one. A few surviving mercenaries struggled onto higher ground, only to be captured at rifle point by Cardassian troops. Alive, because information was more valuable than blood. Cardassians did not kill without purpose. Gul Dukat watched with cold satisfaction. He had not simply won a battle. He had dismantled a civilization. No explosion, no invasion, no glorious charge, just the patient application of pressure until the enemy collapsed under the weight of its own excess. Cardassians, disciplined and relentless, stood on reinforced ground, weapons raised, but they did not rush into the palace. They didn't need to. The Huts were coming out, not by choice, not by surrender, by fear. The first of them rolled through the cracking doors, propelled by terrified retainers. Slimy, massive, dripping with panic, the Hut bellowed at Cardassian soldiers in a guttural voice, demanding transit, demanding negotiation, demanding safe passage, even offering half his syndicate holdings. Cardassian troops remained motionless, rifles unwavering. The Hut's arrogance began to crack. He begged. No one responded. From the palace interior, a rumble deeper than the swamp itself echoed outward. The entire throne hall was sinking. Massive pillars sank slowly, then rapidly, tilting the palace structure like a sinking barge. Frantically, Huts pushed past one another, stampeding in their living avalanche of terrified flesh. They shoved lesser Khajiitics into the muck to lighten their load, abandoning allies and betraying partners, all to buy themselves a few more seconds of life. In their desperation, they revealed their true nature. Not warlords, not masterminds, just gluttons clawing for breath. Dukat stepped forward as the largest Hut emerged, dragged by dozens of servants. This Khajiitich boss still clung to his dignity, trying to speak with authority through labored breath. He managed a half-snarl, half-wheeze. "You, Cardassian slime, you are parasites on Empire. We have ruled 1,000 years. You cannot replace us." Dukat regarded him with the amused curiosity of a researcher addressing an ignorant specimen. "I do not need to replace you," he replied, voice steady. "I only need to make you irrelevant." The Hut froze. Even through arrogance and panic, he understood the meaning of those words. The palace groaned again, collapsing further. Terrified roars erupted from within. retainers and minor huts were dragged into the mire as the entrance collapsed behind them. A final spurt of swamp water burst upward like vomit from the dying palace. The hut leaders had no more options. They surrendered not with ceremony, but with fear. Their empire died not in flame, but in shame. Dukat turned to his officers. The Cardassian troops watched in disciplined silence as their enemies were reduced to captives, stripped of control, stripped of leverage. The swamp finished what strategic inevitability began. Nal Huta's symbolic heart was now little more than a drowned carcass, its rulers helpless on its shores. Cardassians began the slow process of securing the region. Engineers stabilized the ground. Intelligence officers approached, surrendered mercenaries with data pads, recording syndicate information, converting criminals into informants, turning the hut network into Cardassian infrastructure. Markets would reopen under a new banner, not of greed, but of controlled exploitation. Dukat stood above the sinking palace, gaze cold and satisfied. The swamp water still churned, swallowing treasures the galaxy believed indestructible. In the distance, bound huts were hauled to containment transports, stripped not of wealth, but of influence. "You do not win control," Dukat murmured to himself. "You build it." The wind carried the sound of collapsing stone. Nal Huta's crown was gone. Cardassia did not raise its own palace in its place. It didn't need monuments. It needed information, networks, obedience. A new crime empire, one founded not on decadence, but structure, was being born. There was no cheering from the soldiers, no celebration. Cardassians did not revel in victory. They recorded it, managed it, and prepared for the next. Dukat walked to his transport, passing rows of captured syndicate lieutenants, bribing commanders now stripped of bribes, slavers now in shackles, bounty hunters now conscripts. Cardassia would reshape the criminal underworld the same way it reshaped everything it touched, through quiet, relentless domination. The swamp burped its last breath as the palace disappeared beneath the murk. A kingdom of gluttony suffocated in its own filth. Dukat boarded his ship. Protecting the empire meant expanding it, and expansion required calculation. The Hutt cartels were gone, not with violence, but with replacement. As Cardassian transports lifted from the surface and the swamp claimed the last ruins of Hutt rule, the cosmos registered the outcome, not as a triumph of honor or strategy, but of logic. Cardassia won by making crime itself orderly. The stars observed. The score shifted, and the multiverse waited for the next reckoning. Score. Cardassians claim victory. Star Trek rises again. The multiverse dimmed as if pausing to breathe. No ships moved. No engines ignited. For a moment, every victorious faction stood at the threshold of consequence, aware that only one universe could survive. There would be no diplomacy, no alliances, no trade agreements or shared science. The rules were carved into existence itself. Lose, and your universe vanished. Refuse to fight, and both universes vanished. No timeline, no memory, no echo. The cosmic presence, the same being that had whispered the doom of the Hutts and watched the Borg reshape steel into nightmare, stretched its voice across both galaxies without sound or form. It did not speak in sentences. It spoke in decrees. The peace you worship is fragile. The war you fear is necessary. If you will not fight to exist, you do not deserve existence. The last two factions, the ones who least wanted this conflict, were forced into the arena. The United Federation of Planets, the Galactic Republic. Two civilizations built on hope, diplomacy, civilization, ethics, learning, and unity. Two forces that sought order and prosperity not through domination, but understanding. One guided by logic and science, one guided by the Force and the Senate, both unwilling to shed blood without cause, both commanded to spill it anyway. The cosmic voice shattered the hesitation they shared. Your ideals are meaningless if you cannot protect them. Fight, evolve, or be forgotten. There was no battlefield chosen by either side. The multiverse selected one itself, a dead expanse between galaxies, empty, silent, with no stars to witness what would unfold. A void without planets, without nebulae, without consequences to physical space. No civilians, no innocent bystanders, only warriors and ideals. It was the cruelest kindness possible. In that silent wasteland, fleets materialized like opposing philosophies crystallized into steel. The Federation emerged not as a war machine, but as a flotilla of explorers forced into conflict. Starfleet ships glowed blue and gold, sleek hulls shining like vessels meant to map unknown worlds, cure diseases, protect communities. Even now, they broadcast non-aggression signals. Even now, they opened hailing frequencies. In contrast, the Republic arrived with practiced resolution. Venators, escort frigates, and ARC starfighter wings, guided not by hatred or conquest, but by tragic duty. They had defended a galaxy of billions by force, not choice. Their cannons were precision tools. Their fleet was a reluctant blade. On their respective bridges, leaders struggled against purpose. Jean-Luc Picard stood at the center of the Enterprise D's command well, hands clasped behind him like a man trying to stop a storm with posture alone. His eyes reflected the fleet ahead, sorrow and contemplation mixing with unwavering duty. Beside him, officers waited, not for orders, but for absolution. On a Venator bridge, Jedi generals stood in quiet meditation. They did not feel anger toward the Federation. The Force did not scream for blood. It whispered grief. Master Ki-Adi-Mundi lowered his head, sensing the clash to come. "This war should not exist," he murmured. Master Luminara Unduli responded only with a whisper. "Yet if we do not fight, everything we protect will end." Clone commanders waited without fear, bred to obey the Republic's needs, but not to relish combat. They understood sacrifice without bitterness. Their helmets hid the humanity behind the uniform, but their silence betrayed reluctance. Two peaceful civilizations faced one another with weapons ready, ashamed that they were forced to use them. The cosmic presence waited for no speeches. Its judgment struck the void like an executioner's hammer. "Begin!" Starfleet did not fire. They activated defensive shielding and maneuvered to wide arcs to avoid direct aggression. Their formation spread like wings, seeking room to negotiate, to breathe. The Enterprise sent out a final broadband hail, one last plea. No response came. Not because the Republic refused to answer, but because the cosmic decree denied them the choice. The Republic's ships fired autonomously, controlled by the invisible imperative of existence. Blue ion torpedoes streaked across the void and detonated along Federation shields. Starfleet staggered, but did not fall. They did not return fire immediately. Picard steadied himself, gripping the armrest of the captain's chair, feeling every vibration of exploding peace. When the sensors recovered, he spoke a single, heavy command. "Disable their weapons. Target defensive arrays only." Starfleet phasers lanced forward. Federated fire did not slice through hulls. It carved around them, disabling power grids, knocking out engines without piercing them. The Federation fought like surgeons, not soldiers. Republic vessels staggered, powerless, drifting, engines flaring. Yet more fire came, not by will, by mandate. Republic gunners fired with perfect accuracy, tearing apart nacelles, stunning impulse reactors, forcing Starfleet to choose between total defense or counterattack. Republic starfighters dove like precision instruments, not predators, striking only system-critical targets. The galaxy's most disciplined defensive fleet was forced into offense. Picard closed his eyes, exhaled, and said the words Starfleet officers feared more than death. "Return fire, full power. Do not aim to kill, aim to survive." Phasers brightened, quantum torpedoes armed. And Starfleet, a navy built for peace, fired as if regret could guide a weapon. The Republic, a navy built for defense, fired as if remorse could be restrained. Two moral civilizations bled one another in slow, devastating increments, like surgeons cutting nerves to amputate limbs they wish they could save. No hatred, no vengeance, only survival. And the universe, cold and vast, waited for what it demanded next. The first controlled exchange had been a tragedy. The second would be a necessity. There could no longer be half measures, no longer be restraint disguised as mercy. The cosmic decree had cornered two civilizations that had built their identities on not being conquerors. When forced to fight, they did so with precision, honor, and sorrow, but they still fought. The void between them lit again. Republic starfighters strafed across the Federation line, their movements sharp and coordinated, guided by Jedi insight. Starfleet's targeting computers struggled to lock onto vessels whose pilots felt the battlefield instead of calculating it. Clone pilots wove formations like fluid geometry. ARC-170s swerved into the blind spots of Federation sensors, exploiting every gap with instinctual timing. Picard's bridge trembled. Red alerts blared. Tactical reported. Multiple contacts breaching inner defensive radius. They're not going for our hull. They're blinding our sensors. Picard gritted his teeth. They're disabling us as we disabled them. There was no triumph in his voice, only realization. The Republic understood the Federation's restraint, and they were mirroring it out of honor, not advantage. Yet the cost of honorable restraint was increasing. A wing of Republic starfighters cut across the USS Tianan's dorsal surface, firing micro-ion bursts into the navigational array. The cruiser spun, disoriented, as if struck blind. Clone pilots pulled away before delivering a killing blow. They left the ship maimed, not dead. Commander Cody radioed from his starfighter, tight and unreadable. "All units, avoid reactors. Target only mobility and comms." In answer, Starfleet weapons recalibrated across dozens of ships. Phaser controls shifted from lethal piercing beams to broad-spectrum discharges meant to disable entire sections without breaching hull. Quantum torpedo warheads were reduced to impact concussions instead of antimatter annihilation. The Federation was trying to win without killing anyone. It was noble. It was tragic. It was unsustainable. Deep in the void, the USS Gemini attempted a desperate lateral maneuver to escape the dogfight zone, only to be intercepted by a Republic frigate rotating into position with chilling precision. Clone gunners fired a synchronized volley. Shields collapsed in a cascade of sparks. A final strike ruptured the impulse drive. The Gemini erupted in a blue-white plume. Hundreds of Starfleet officers vanished without, Screams without glory, without graves. This time, the Republic had not spared them, not because of cruelty, but because if they had not fired, the ship would have flanked their support carriers and disabled their own fleet. Mercy had become impossible. Republic losses followed. A Venator cruiser, the Resolute, fell into a phaser crossfire while attempting to shield its escort ships. Its deflector grid fractured under sustained beam pressure. It tried to maneuver away from a Starfleet torpedo volley, but the shockwave hit an outstretched hangar wing. The ship tore apart along its spine. The bridge section broke loose, drifting like a severed organ still pulsing with command voices before the fire swallowed them. Master Plo Koon felt every dying breath through the Force. His heart constricted. He fought not with rage, but sorrow. Lights dimmed around him, not because of systems damage, but because the Force recoiled from having to guide violence against those who did not want to fight. He whispered to himself, "Survival is judgment. We have no other path." The Enterprise D led the Starfleet center. 4 Republic cruisers targeted it simultaneously. Picard ordered evasive pattern Delta, but the Enterprise was a Galaxy-class vessel, built for exploration, for diplomacy, for presence, not for sudden war with Force-guided tacticians. The bridge shook like a living creature. Sparks showered the ops station. A junior officer was thrown across the deck as consoles overloaded and burst. Riker caught him and hauled him up with urgency stamped across his features. "We can't keep taking these hits. They're picking us apart." Worf, half shouting over the alarms, barked, "We should fire full torpedo salvos. End this before they destroy us." Picard slammed a fist into the armrest. "We are not executioners." Riker turned sharply toward him, anger breaking through restraint for the first time. "And if they kill us, Captain, what then? Who protects our ideals if we die with them?" Picard froze. The terrible truth was laid bare. Cooperation would not save them. Moral purity could not end the battle. If the Federation died, so did everything it stood for. On the Republic flagship, Jedi Masters sensed the same epiphany. Ki-Adi-Mundi opened his eyes, weighed down as if gravity had increased tenfold. "They will not yield," he whispered. Luminara Unduli answered, "Then we must yield to necessity." Both sides recognized a corner had been turned. Starfleet ships rearmed their torpedoes to full antimatter payload. Republic Devastator beams warmed to penetrating frequency. The Force bore witness. Logic bore witness. Survival demanded escalation. The battle intensified. Federation volleys lanced outward in bright, cruel arcs. Venator shields blistered under antimatter shock waves. Republic turbo lasers returned fire in disciplined ripples that carved Federation hulls like molten lines across sculpture. The USS Ardent exploded after venting warp plasma. The Star Destroyer Vornax split open under sustained phaser barrages. A Republic medical frigate shattered after a stray torpedo ignited its supply bay. The USS Ascension caught a jet of turbo laser fire across its saucer, turning a quarter of its crew into dust inside their own decks. It was still not hatred. It was obligation. The void lit with atrocity that neither side believed in. Picard looked out over the carnage and finally understood what the cosmic presence had been forcing upon them. Civilization was not measured in ideals held comfortably. It was measured in what ideals survived in fire. He lowered his head and gave the order no one believed he ever would. "Target reactors." The Republic sensed it simultaneously. Jedi generals looked at one another and spoke the same command. Aim to kill. They spoke it with heartbreak. They spoke it with resolve. They spoke it because survival had become the only moral law left. The firefight returned, no longer shackled by restraint. Two peaceful civilizations shed their innocence. The void did not judge. The cosmic presence did not praise. The war was now pure. It was real, and one universe would die for it. The moment Mercy died, space itself felt darker. Torpedoes no longer struck with the gentleness of tactical disablements. They detonated with the raw brutality of annihilation. Turbo lasers no longer carved safe corridors through hull plating. They ripped into reactors, targeting life support like a predator goes for the throat. The void between the fleets ceased to be a battlefield and became an execution ground where idealism was forced to bleed. Starfleet's tactical channels filled with clipped, urgent orders, precise, emotionless, deadly. Phaser arrays shifted from wide dispersal to needle-focused lances engineered to punch through shields and cut power cores directly. Quantum torpedoes were no longer reduced to concussive impacts. They carried antimatter payloads burning at full capacity, each one capable of splitting a ship in half if delivered cleanly. Republic ships adapted without hesitation. Devastator beam cannons changed modulation, no longer weakening shields, but piercing them entirely. ARC-170 squadrons began targeting warp nacelles with ruthless precision, using proton torpedoes like surgical knives cutting arteries, preventing escape before moving in for the fatal shot. Clone pilots flew not with eagerness, but with grim competence, as if every kill weighed heavily on their bones. The USS Olympus attempted to retreat and regroup, only for 3 Republic frigates to box it in. Their turbo lasers converged on the nacelles, crippling warp integrity. The Federation ship tried for impulse, too late. A coordinated cannon burst, ruptured its core. The explosion bloomed white-blue, silent in the void, scattering hopes like ash across the battlefield. On the Republic side, the Jedi cruiser Harmony advanced to shield vulnerable ships. It extended deflector power to the nearest frigate, only to find itself fully exposed. 2 Starfleet heavy cruisers locked onto its unstable shield envelope. They did not hesitate. Twin quantum salvos launched, spiraling like cobalt bullets. The Jedi on board widened their eyes, too far from any intervention. The Harmony vanished into an expanding sphere of shattered hull fragments and imploding heat. The Force recoiled across the remainder of the Republic fleet. Jedi staggered, wounded not in body, but in spirit. Luminara Unduli clutched the command rail, her voice quivering. So many deaths, all at once. Ki Adi Mundi steadied himself, focusing through the grief. We cannot afford to feel it now. His eyes hardened, not cold, but resolute. Feeling must wait until we survive. Across the void, a similar transformation took place on the Enterprise D. Worf stood now, not as a security chief, but as a war officer. Torpedoes reloaded, phaser arrays stable, ready to fire on command. His voice was no longer conflicted. He had accepted necessity. Riker's posture shifted, one hand not on the chair, but on the tactical rail, bracing for every shockwave. His voice was low, grim. "Captain, they're adapting faster than us." He wasn't wrong. The Republic's war doctrine had been tested for centuries within internal conflict. The Federation's weapons were advanced, efficient, but not designed for attrition against trained military tacticians guided by precognition. Picard didn't blink. Then we outthink them, target Jedi command ships, remove their coordination. Federation ships realigned, shifting formation like a flock of metallic predators. They struck not at frontline destroyers, but at the heart of Republic strategy, the Jedi coordination hubs. Phaser beams ripped through command towers, torpedoes shattered meditation chambers. Clone officers scrambled to compensate, but without Force guidance, formations weakened. Republic reaction was immediate. Jedi survivors unleashed power normally reserved for direst moments. On board the flagship Resolute Remnant, Master Shaak Ti extended her senses through the fleet, guiding dozens of ships at once with lightning-fast foresight. Her mind strained, her spirit wavered, but coordination returned. Turbo lasers struck before Federation shields could rotate. Proton torpedoes found cracks in Starfleet hulls before they formed. The Jedi became a living battle computer. Picard saw the shift. They've concentrated command into a single point. Which means, Data said through damaged circuitry, their weakness is now centralized. A path emerged. The Enterprise aimed directly at the Resolute Remnant, the Jedi nerve center. Shaak Ti sensed it instantly. Her eyes widened, and the Force surged around her. "They are coming for me!" Master Kuhn's voice echoed through the channel. "Hold. Do not retreat. If you fall back, the Ehei fleet collapses." "I know," she whispered. The Enterprise lunged forward, supported by a wedge formation of Starfleet cruisers. Republic ships moved to intercept. Clone pilots swarmed, forming a defensive cloud around the flagship. The Enterprise's hull trembled under waves of turbo laser fire. Picard refused to change course. "Stay on target," the Republic countered with force and clarity. Jedi-guided carriers released every remaining starfighter. Hundreds streaked into the path of the Federation offensive. Camino-trained pilots executed deadly corkscrews through phaser fire, sacrificing themselves to block torpedo trajectories, intentionally colliding with Starfleet blasts to protect the flagship. They died without hesitation, without anger, without regret. Worf gritted his teeth. "They are using themselves as shields," Riker's voice cracked. "They're not fighting to win. They're fighting to preserve something." Fighters exploded against the Enterprise's shields like sparks against fire, buying seconds at the cost of dozens of lives. The Enterprise pushed through the carnage until it reached firing range. Quantum torpedoes locked onto the flagship. Just one volley would end Shaak Ti and collapse Republic strategy permanently. "Fire," Picard commanded. Before the order could complete, the Resolute Remnant unleashed the Force in its purest form. Shaak Ti, connected to every clone mind, every ship's trajectory, every point of impact, reached not for a weapon, but for interference. The Force surged outward, touching every missile guidance system across 3 Federation ships. Quantum torpedoes spun off course, losing lock, veering harmlessly into the void like confused predators chasing ghosts. Data stared at the display, lights flickering around him. "Captain, she disrupted our targeting mechanisms without touching them physically," Picard whispered. "She jammed our minds. The Remnant lived, but the fleet was breaking. The Federation had exhausted its non-lethal options. The Republic had exhausted its reserves of mercy. It was now a contest between the last resources of science and the last breath of the Force. Both sides prepared their final charge, and the void trembled. The void felt heavy, as if the entire multiverse were leaning in to watch the final moment of two civilizations that never wanted this war. The Federation formed a tightening spearhead around the Enterprise D, engines humming like a wounded animal, gathering strength for one last charge. Across from them, the Republic fell into a protective crescent around the battered Resolute remnant, every functioning starfighter and cruiser bent into a shield of sacrifice. Both fleets were cracked, bleeding power, dripping ionized sparks and smoking coolant. No strategy remained but survival. The cosmic presence did not intervene. It did not guide the Force, nor the warp fields, nor the fate of the dying. It only observed, waiting to erase one galaxy. Starfleet pushed forward first. Phaser beams carved an opening through a weakened Republic corvette, tearing through its engine core. The vessel split into two halves, burning silently in a slow tumble. The Enterprise charged through the debris cloud, deflectors glancing hull fragments aside like falling stones. Starfleet escorts struggled to keep pace, their warp coils strained, their shields flickering. Riker leaned over the tactical display, hands white-knuckled around the console. "If we don't break through now, we'll lose our forward momentum. They'll box us in." Picard nodded once. No more speeches, no more appeals. Only one order mattered. "Maximum impulse, full weapons. We end this." The Enterprise D surged ahead. The Republic responded in kind. The Remnant's hangars opened one final time, not to deploy another wave of fighters, but to unleash a rain of capital-class proton warheads, massive batteries built for sieges, not fleet exchanges. These weren't precision weapons. They were hammers meant to end wars. Clone gunners armed them with terrifying calm. Jedi commanders braced themselves, not in anger, but acceptance. The warheads launched, trailing electric comet tails across the void. Worf barked over the roar of emergency klaxons. "Brace for impact!" Torches of blue fire slammed into Federation shields. The Enterprise buckled under the force, deck plating twisting. Bulkheads cracked. Emergency force fields flared along ruptured corridors. A warp coolant vent exploded along the port nacelle, coating the void with shimmering vapor. But she held. The Federation's flagship refused to die. "Return fire!" Picard shouted. 3 Starfleet cruisers flanked the Enterprise, firing quantum torpedoes so rapidly their launch tubes overheated. Strings of antimatter detonations ripped holes in the Republic crescent. A Venator lost its entire starboard wing. Another buckled as quantum yield crushed its reactor casing, peeling the ship open like fruit. The Republic crescent turned into a jagged arc, filled with fire and wreckage, yet it still held its shield around the remnant. The Jedi ship glowed through the cracks. The Force gathered around it, not as a weapon nor a shield, but as resolve manifested. Shakti stood in the command well, robes scorched, hands trembling from overuse. Clone commanders around her were bleeding from ruptured ear vessels, limbs shaking. She whispered under her breath, not in rage, but hope. "Hold the line, hold it, for everyone who depends on us, for everything beyond us." Her words carried through the Force like a final breath. The crew obeyed, not from programming, but belief. The Enterprise broke through the remaining line of frigates. Republic ships rammed into its path to block it. A medical cruiser shielded the remnant, only to be obliterated by overlapping Starfleet barrages. A damaged corvette turned broadside, absorbing 3 torpedoes meant for the flagship shaft. Its hull vaporized, but it bought seconds. Seconds were enough. The Enterprise charged straight at the remnant, battered, burning, but unstoppable. Engines screamed, hull plating peeled, but she closed the distance. Picard stood. Shaak Ti raised her hand. 2 leaders, neither conquerors, choosing to kill because the universe forced them to. The remnant's main cannon came online. The Enterprise's torpedo launchers glowed white-hot. Both sides were ready to fire the killing blow. Riker stared at the tactical display, voice cracking. "Captain, if we fire first, they die. If we wait, we die," Picard whispered, barely audible. "There is no peace without existence." Shaak Ti whispered the same words to herself, through a different faith. The living must survive. They fired, not at each other. At the same instant, both leaders shifted their aim away from the other's reactor. Picard targeted weapon grids instead of the core. Shaak Ti angled her cannon at engines instead of the heart. 2 shots intended to spare a soul, even when ordered to kill. Phaser-tipped quantum torpedoes smashed into the remnant's weapon ring, exploding it into shards. Devastator energy slammed into the Enterprise's impulse block, detonating the whole drive system in a violent flare. Both ships were crippled. Both were spared. For a moment, the void held its breath. The cosmic entity did not. Mercy is meaningless without victory. Starfleet auxiliary cruisers advanced, unwilling but compelled. Republic destroyers turned to finish the kill, exhausted but bound by survival. Both sides watched their own final order march forward without permission. And then, they both gave the same command at the same moment: hold fire. Republic officers disobeyed the cosmic decree, shutting down targeting. Starfleet crews refused to execute lethal shots. Jedi and officers overrode automatic systems, ripping out power couplings, disabling fire controls. They rejected the rule. They refused to kill further. The cosmic entity's voice surged through the void, furious, ancient, undeniable. Then you choose erasure together. Picard stared into the darkness, chest heaving. Shaak Ti braced herself on the railing, battered but upright. Both sides realized the same truth. They had chosen to die rather than kill. The void around them turned black, reality folding, erasure beginning. Republic and Federation fleets stood together in defiance of fate. For the first time in the tournament, 2 universes had refused to obey a god. Darkness swallowed the void as if the universe itself had stopped breathing. The final battle had not ended with a victor's roar, but with mutual refusal, a choice no one was permitted to make. Federation and Republic fleets flickered under collapsing starlight. Hulls dimmed, core reactors silenced, warp coils and hyperdrives unraveled into quantum dust. Reality no longer had a place to hold them. There was no explosion, no grand shockwave. Ships simply ceased, their edges dissolving pixel by pixel like old memories being erased from existence. The cosmic entity's judgment pressed against them with the cold inevitability of a law older than galaxies. Defiance earns oblivion. Shaak Ti felt the force strain and splinter, a dam collapsing under the pressure of a cosmic tide that did not care about morality. Jedi senses began to drown in meaninglessness. The Force could not flow through nothingness. The crew of the Enterprise D felt their bodies blur at the edges, fingertips smearing into empty air like watercolor dissolving in rain. Picard watched his own hand distort and vanish. The lights of his bridge dimmed into an unplaceable gray that felt like the end of memory. Republic clone commanders clutched railings, trying to anchor themselves to something that was no longer there. Their armor faded like chalk in wind. Starfleet officers cried out, reaching for consoles, only to find their arms passing through fading metal. The multiverse was deleting their choice. Pain was not the weapon. It was erasure itself. The cosmic presence whispered with the coldness of a verdict, not vengeance. There is no peace without obedience to reality. And then, something unexpected happened. Reality fought back, not the Force, not warp physics, something deeper, more ancient, something that remembered existence itself. The two fleets, locked in shared defiance, created a paradox the universe had never faced. Two civilizations choosing extinction rather than domination. The Force surged, not as weapon, not as balance, but as refusal. The warp fields from the Federation vessels pulsed, not to travel, but to preserve identity. The two energies, normally opposite, never harmonized, began to merge under shared will. Force energy coiled into the electric nerves of Starfleet minds. Warp fields resonated with Jedi senses. Reality had never been asked to sustain this union. Yet, it had also never been asked to destroy those who refused cruelty. The cosmic entity felt the shift. You cannot merge, you are opposites. But the defiance of two galaxies was no longer separate. Officers who had never known the Force began to sense one another's fear and resolve. Jedi felt warp engines like pulses of determination. Clone troopers felt the tranquil patience of Vulcan logic across the thinning void. Starfleet engineers sensed the sacred urgency of protecting younglings on Coruscant. Existence had found a loophole. Their refusal to kill each other was not stagnation. It was evolution. The cosmic entity pressed harder. Erasure thickened like tar. Space bent inward like a closing fist. Yet the fleets resisted, not with weapons, but with unity no battle could produce. Contas, hands gripped imaginary railings beside Starfleet engineers who couldn't see them, but could feel them. A Jedi murmured through the Force, not to her fleet, but to the entire dying universe. We will not cease. Picard spoke aloud, not knowing if anyone could hear. If survival demands we abandon who we are, then we do not deserve to survive. A clone trooper whispered through a fading calm. We follow orders, but not to kill hope. Reality cracked. The cosmic entity recoiled, not in rage, but in shock. This outcome had never occurred in any timeline, any cycle of destruction, any multiversal cleanse. When empires refused, they collapsed or were conquered. When peace would not fight, it was erased. But never before had two civilizations chosen mutual sacrifice over domination. They weren't surrendering, they were evolving. Existence itself began to reroute. Instead of collapsing into nothingness, the void ignited, not with fire, but with identity. Starfleet warp signatures and Republic hyperspace echoes intertwined into a shimmering lattice. Light wove through erasure like stars defending themselves. The universe began forming a cocoon around the two fleets, protective, reactive, adaptive. For the first time, the cosmic presence spoke not with command, but hesitation. This is not stagnation. Shakti stepped forward within the remnant's dying bridge, her outline reforming, her breath returning. Aboard the Enterprise, Picard solidified, hand coming back into existence finger by finger. The cosmic entity's voice thinned, no longer absolute. If you will not evolve through violence, the void brightened. Then show me how you evolve. Erasure halted. The fleets remained. The test had changed. Two peaceful civilizations had forced the universe to rewrite its own rules. The final judgment had yet to be made. But the score, no longer measured in death, prepared to shift in a way no war had ever imagined. The void did not restore itself with warmth or welcome. It stabilized like a wounded animal breathing through pain, cautious and uncertain. Debris from both fleets hung suspended, not falling, not drifting, held in a stillness that felt like a question. The light cocoon surrounding the Republic and Federation flickered, unstable, as if reality itself didn't yet understand what it had agreed to preserve. There was no sound, yet every consciousness felt the same broadcast. No voice, no command, only a sensation. Prove what survival means. The presence did not demand battle. It demanded definition. On the Enterprise D, Picard stood on the bridge. No alarms, no console sparking, only silence. Officers looked around like they'd awakened from a nightmare, only to find the dream still staring back at them. Picard's eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with comprehension. This was no second chance. It was an unfinished sentence. Across the void, Grand Master Shaak Ti stood, rigid on the Republic flagship's command platform. Jedi do not fear the unknown, but they feel its shape. And what she sensed here was curiosity, dangerous curiosity, not the hunger of the Sith, nor the balance of the Force. Something that wanted to learn by witnessing. "Do you feel it?" asked a clone commander, voice low, almost reverent. Shaak Ti nodded. "It studies us." Meanwhile, Starfleet officers began to notice something unsettling on their readouts. Not weapons, not ships, something new. Structures forming in the empty space between the fleets, like crystalline growths made of compressed starlight, assembling themselves into pillars and archways. The light lattice was becoming architecture. A clone artillery officer aboard a cruiser spoke with unease. "We're inside something," another soldier corrected him. "No, something is forming around us." The cocoon wasn't a protective bubble. It was a laboratory. Picard raised his voice with quiet authority. "Red alert, defensive posture. Do not fire unless fired upon." His crew obeyed instantly, though no enemy existed yet. Shaak Ti gave similar orders to her fleet. "Stand ready, but act only with intention. Do not invite violence." Clone gunners powered up cannons, fingers poised yet restrained. Warships hummed with tension, armed but unwilling. The cosmic structure finished its formation. The cocoon's walls sealed shut like closing wings. The fleets were enclosed in a cathedral of pure space, light plated with gravity, spiraling into rifts and fragments. In its center, a tendril of living stardust uncoiled, twisting until it became something vaguely humanoid. Not a face, not a form, not a body, just a suggestion of shape, a figure sculpted from ideas it did not understand. It appeared as if reality was attempting to impersonate consciousness. The fleets waited. No attack, no words, only presence. The entity reached, not physically, but through perception, into both civilizations at once. The Force trembled as it was inspected. Warp physics pulsed as they were probed. Federation values, Republic ideals, ethics, duty, identity. The entity examined them as if comparing designs of two intricate machines. It did not speak. It learned. A faint hum vibrated through every ship, and suddenly star charts flickered across bridge hollow panels, showing thousands of galaxies unknown to both Republic and Federation. Some vibrant, some dying, some erased. Not because they lost, because they refused. A message formed not as language, but as comprehension. Existence only keeps what continues to change. Not what wins, not what conquers, not what surrenders, what evolves. The structure around them pulsed brighter, and something began forming at its center. Massive, metallic, yet organic, like a starship being grown, not built. It spun through shapes, testing possibilities, sleek like a Constitution-class cruiser, then sharp like a Republic Venator, then something in between. It was forging a design neither universe knew. A single clone trooper whispered, awestruck, "It's combining us." Starfleet science officers realized the same. A vessel built from warp theory and hyperspace logic, shielded by deflector harmonics and guided by the Force itself. But the entity wasn't offering a gift. It was presenting a question. What future do you choose? The ship halted in its construction. The entity demanded one answer from two civilizations. Picard stepped forward, sensing that words mattered now more than weapons. He spoke, not just through comm systems, but into the very presence watching them. We evolve by collaboration, by curiosity and shared discovery. On the Republic flagship, Shaak Ti responded, not to Picard, though she heard him through the Force, but to the same question. We evolve by protecting the innocent, by choosing compassion over dominance. The entity absorbed both answers. Reality rippled. The hybrid ship glowed brighter. It was awaiting a final component, direction. Now the fleet sensed the truth. It wasn't building a weapon. It was building a future. The question was simple, terrifying, and absolute. Will two civilizations share evolution? The light dimmed. Pressure constricted. The hybrid ship began to collapse in on itself, like a possibility dying before birth. The entity waited for one act, not words, commitment. Then, without calculation, without planning, Captain Picard opened a channel. Shaak Ti received it. There was no negotiation, no treaty, just one universal acknowledgement. We build this future together. Shaak Ti closed her eyes, and through the Force whispered, "We accept." Warp reactors hummed. Hyperdrives resonated. Starfleet engineering vessels launched construction beams. Republic cruisers deployed droid builders. The hybrid ship stabilized. It began to grow again, not commanded by the entity, built by choice. Star Trek and Star Wars had never formed unity before, but the universe was not asking them to merge powers. It was asking them to co-create survival. The cosmic presence watched, silent and focused, like an artist witnessing its canvas paint itself. There would be no erasure, not today. But there was one final test ahead. The evolution was not complete. It did not look like victory. The Federation flagship broke apart under the last spiral of torpedo fire, its hull torn open as if soundlessly screaming into the void. The Republic cruiser drifted toward it with smoking engines, flickering shields barely holding, and flames leaking into space, like spilled sunrise. Yet only one still functioned. Only one still aimed its guns. Only one ship still had life left in it, even if faint and trembling. On the Republic bridge, clone officers gasped through burns as Jedi steadied themselves against shattered consoles, their voices worn and cracked. On the Starfleet side, the Enterprise's saucer split into two breaking plates, dismembered by its own fading power. Escape pods drifted outward like seeds seeking mercy. The last phaser cannon flickered, failed, and died. No weapon answered. No engines responded. The Republic fired once more, not a killing shot, but a decisive one, through the Enterprise's exposed hull, cracking it in a silent, final burst of plasma. The battle was finished. The Republic stood alive by a thread. Starfleet floated, broken yet unbroken in spirit, watching through fractured hull windows as their enemy refused to celebrate. There was no cheer, no triumph, only exhaustion and shame on both ends. A clone trooper reported with a shaking voice. "Target disabled," Shaak Ti whispered, without pride. "We did not win. We survived." A Vulcan survivor in a cracked escape pod murmured as the nebula swallowed them. There is no logic in victory without purpose. The cosmos waited for no reflection. Space itself warped, forcing all fleets to align before the looming silhouette of the celestial judge. Its shape stretched through nebula smoke and dying stars, towering like a forgotten god sculpted from collapsing galaxies. Their fear was silenced by awe. Its voice sang into their minds like prophecy carved from comets and dying light. 5 battles, 5 lessons. The nebula swirled as if stirred by its breath. Borg overcame stagnation through ruthless adaptation. The debris of the cube and the Death Star's remains evaporated into dust. Mandalorians thrived where honor consumed Klingons. The bodies of dead warriors dissolved into silence. Romulans conquered through insight where droids obeyed without question. The CIS fleet vanished like memory erased. Cardassians weaponized corruption while Hutts drowned in their own greed. Crime lords and slaves alike turned to drifting mist. Its voice darkened, void swelling into its words. The Republic endured because the Federation clung to mercy too long. The battlefield flickered with holographic numbers burned into reality itself. Star Trek 3. Star Wars 2. Every ship trembled as though the score itself carried weight. The entity expanded, its scale impossible to measure, its face a silhouette of galaxies imploding and being reborn. Victory is not glory. Victory is survival. The fleets felt its judgment like cold wind on exposed bone. The stagnant shall be forgotten. The evolving shall continue. Warp drives, hyperdrives, slipstreams, and quantum tunnels ignited beyond their command. Every vessel, damaged or whole, was dragged screaming into a new course. The nebula cracked open like a cosmic egg, revealing a corridor of endless structure and mind-shattering dimensions, a highway woven from gravity and thought. Before the ships vanished into it, the entity whispered one more promise, heavy as fate. The mind will be the next battlefield. The universe twisted around them, dragging every survivor, every victor, every wounded hero, every leader stained by choices, into a realm where thought would bleed and logic would kill. The tournament continues. New factions await in the next saga.